Take a seat. We are about to get started. I'm Jonathan Dworkin, Vice President for Policy and Communications here at New Deal, and we're just thrilled to be here with you in Phoenix for this year's Ideas Summit. So with that, I'm very proud to introduce NewDEAL Forum CEO, Debbie Cox Bultan.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I am Debbie Cox Bultan, CEO of the New Deal and NewDEAL Forum, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to Arizona. I'm so excited to be here for the next couple days. I personally, given all the negativity and chaos going on around, I'm just ready for a chance to exhale, maybe, to see some old and new friends, and to share ideas that are working for the American people. So I want to start with just a huge thank you to all of you for joining us. I know that it is very easy to get discouraged right now with all the divisiveness, with the name calling, with the circus. But I love when we get together. I'm always reminded that amid all of this, the work that we're collectively doing is so important. We're rejecting cynicism and the idea that politics is a game. We know that getting up every day and trying to solve problems and deliver for the American people is both a privilege and a serious responsibility. We know, in short, that politics is an honorable profession. There are serious issues facing the country, of course, including unprecedented attacks on democracy and a movement to take us backwards, particularly on women's rights. But there's a lot of good things happening right now here, too, that I want to celebrate and that we should be grateful for and proud of. COVID is mostly behind us. The recovery and job growth is strong. The historical federal investments in America have helped stabilize communities in the short run and are pumping money into long-term investments that will help all of us, things like affordable housing and broadband and more. We're breaking down barriers to access to quality healthcare, education, transit. And AI is here, and while it comes with some challenges, it can also be harnessed for good, making government more accessible and more effective. So we gather in this critical election year to be inspired by each other, to learn from each other, clear-eyed about the threats, but also resolved to continue to build on the progress that's been made over several years. In that spirit, as many of you know, the summit moves around every year to different cities, and I wanted to tell you a couple reasons why we chose Phoenix this year. First, Maricopa County was ground zero for democracy the fight for democracy in 2020. And thanks to New Deal leaders, including Secretary of State Adrian, who was Maricopa County recorder at the time of the 2020 elections, and then beat back a serious election denier to win Secretary of State. They held the line. Adrian and his colleagues remain some of the most important voices in ensuring free and fair elections around the country, and they have lessons to teach us all. Second, we want to take a look at how many of the innovations that are happening here in Phoenix under the leadership of New Deal leader Mayor Gallego can be exported to other cities and states. I should say one of my favorite stories is Mayor Gallego is the first New Deal leader to succeed a New Deal leader. She took over for Mayor Greg Stanton when he was elected to Congress. So we're going to make sure you're thinking about who's going to succeed you, and we'll get them in here too. Phoenix is the fastest growing city in the country, as many of you know, and under the mayor's leadership has become a leader in transit, climate and sustainability, housing, and so much more. And it's also a great example of that partnership I was talking about, that federal, state, local partnership, where investments in things like from the CHIPS Act have enabled the mayor to expand on her already great work to bring manufacturing jobs to Phoenix and to create good quality jobs and prepare Phoenix for the future. And of course, there's another reason why it's so important that we're here today. One that we could not have predicted when we picked Phoenix a year ago, which is, of course, last week's Supreme Court decision restoring the near total ban on abortion from 1864. That bombshell decision made Arizona not only ground zero for democracy, but also ground zero for the fight for reproductive rights. And yet another reminder of what's at stake in this election. So heading into the event today, the New Deal did a poll conducted by our friends and partners at Mercury Analytics to ask Americans and Arizonans about freedom, about democracy, and about leadership. And I wanted to share some of those findings with you as we get started today. All right. So our three main takeaways from the poll that we did. One, freedom and democracy matter to voters and will be a top issue in driving them to the polls. Number 2, Democrats have an opportunity to take advantage of the GOP's anti-freedom agenda, especially in Arizona. And 3, Americans want leaders that get stuff done. First, freedom is on the ballot. We ask people, when thinking about freedom, to tell us what they think government should do. What does it mean if you care about freedom, the government should be doing about that? And across the board, and by large majorities, you can see that people thought government should be working to improve public safety, to ensure free and fair elections, increase access to education, and protect reproductive rights. For me, this slide was heartening, actually, because we hear about the MAGA movement thinking about government is the problem, government is the enemy, we're going to tear it down. There's very large majorities that say, no, government has a real role to play here in making our lives better. When we asked about which political party most people identified with freedom, Democrats had a lead, actually, albeit a small one, which was very heartening, given that how much the word freedom has been used by Republicans over the years. Interestingly, Arizona, the lead for Democrats was much wider even. 42 to 27 among all Arizona respondents thought Democrats associate Democrats with freedom, and 40-28 among Latinos in Arizona. It's also worth noting, and gives us a roadmap of some work that needs to be done, how high the independent response was that neither party is associated with freedom. When we asked people whether there were certain entities working to protect or undermine freedoms, the Democratic Party was at a net +7, the Republican Party net +3, and the MAGA movement -10. Again, showing that extremism is not playing well. And in Arizona, the Democratic Party was still at +7, but the Republican Party was down -9, and the MAGA movement was down even further at -14. And again, this survey was done before the Supreme Court decision, so I think there'll be further movement there. There's an opportunity, obviously, here, and we need to seize it. The numbers, of course, reflect mistrust. In some entities, we love all those numbers to be higher, but I wanted to just point out that we are particularly heartened to see that among all the groups or entities that we polled, state and local government were among the highest rank of entities that people felt protected their freedoms. When it comes to whether this will matter come Election Day, majorities nationally and in Arizona say that the party they associate with freedom will influence how they vote, underscoring the need to make a case for a freedom-centric agenda. The exception, again, is independents, who say they don't really trust either party or associate either party with freedom, so we do have work to do with that critical group in the electorate. Relatedly, we asked respondents which party they thought was most extreme or radical. This was interesting to me because strong partisans on both sides, as you can see, were not surprisingly about the mirror opposite of each other. And independents, again, gave by far the biggest answer in terms of the largest response that both parties are extreme, so there is more work to do with independents. But an interesting answer to me was the lean Republican response, which instead of being a mirror opposite of lean Dem, it was a little different. A full 58% of lean Republicans said that their party is more or as extreme, while less than half of Democrats said so about their own party. So that, to me, feels like there's an uncomfortableness among lean Republicans with their own party and an opportunity that Democrats can seize on. In Arizona, respondents were closer to the national independence numbers in answering both parties. But again, when it came down between Democrats and Republicans, they clearly thought Republicans were more extreme. This held true with the 0.7 for Democrats among all Arizona respondents and a +9 among Latinos. Finally, in the freedom bucket, it's worth noting again that with the backdrop of the recent Supreme Court case, that in our survey across all groups, every party, including Republicans, men, women, Arizonans generally, and even Latinos in Arizona, that there were solid majorities on the question of whether people thought the government should protect bodily autonomy and reproductive rights. You can see those numbers there. And I would say that given the backpedaling of a lot of Republicans here in the state and around the country, I think that they understand that political reality, but I think it's important that they continue to still push for the extreme policy, so something to be thought about and to be highlighted. We also asked a series of questions about the state of our democracy. You will likely not be surprised to learn that people are not feeling great about our democracy. Among all respondents, only 24% believe it is excellent or good, and that number is even lower among independents. Conversely, 42% of respondents said it was poor or terrible. Interesting, in Arizona, the numbers were a little bit different. With a starker partisan split, only 6% of Republicans saying it's excellent or good, yet 54% of Democrats saying the same thing. On a related question about whether the state of the American democracy is stronger or weaker compared to right after the election, the 2020 elections, only 22% said stronger, with a big partisan gap, a whopping 72% of Republicans and 53% of independents saying much or somewhat weaker. And in Arizona, where the anti-democratic forces have been defeated, the numbers are slightly better. So again, there's a lesson, I think, nationally for all of us there. And like with freedom, we also asked how much democracy or people's feelings about democracy would play into their decision and influence their vote in 2024. And a majority of respondents, including Democrats and Republicans, said a lot or somewhat. So democracy will be on the ballot. But given the partisan split that we're seeing, I think it's fair to say that when we think about talking about democracy, we have to address concerns that have been voiced by both sides, including the barriers to voting, as Democrats tend to talk about, but also reassurances about things like security and transparency. And we're going to hear a lot more about that from Adrian Fontes and his colleagues soon. Finally, we asked about questions about what kind of qualities you're looking for in a political leader. And among the qualities that you can see here, from including things like authentic and humble, uncompromising, charismatic, by far the one that was deemed most important by respondents was to get stuff done. And that was true across party lines. So there's more information about all of this on our website, but again, the key takeaways for me are that freedom and democracy will be on the ballot. The Democrats seem to have made gains in being identified with freedom, something we need to continue to push on, and that there's a work to be done with independents and potentially an opportunity with lean Republicans. And of course, what should be good news for all New Deal leaders sitting in the audience is that they're looking for elected officials who are getting stuff done, and that is who you all are. So with that backdrop, again, I am just thrilled to welcome you all here to Arizona. I'm looking forward to a fantastic 2 days of just inspiration and remembering the work that's being done across the country and stealing ideas from each other and how we can deliver and advance these core freedoms of democracy and freedom. So with that, it is my great pleasure to turn the podium over to the mayor of Phoenix. She's here, New Deal leader Kate Gallego. As I mentioned, Mayor Gallego is serving in her second term as mayor. She is really a national leader on transit, on climate and sustainability, and she's done a remarkable and inspiring job preparing Phoenix for the future. So, Mayor Gallego, to you.
Welcome to Phoenix. We are so honored to host you. In Arizona, we are at the forefront of every political trend. It is great to have so many friends here, and on behalf of the many Arizona elected officials who are with us here today, welcome. We hope that we will show you a great time, and you'll certainly get to touch on some of the most important topics facing our country. We are definitely on the ground of so many of them. We were the closest state in the presidential election, and you are now in the largest voting jurisdiction to flip from Trump to Biden in the last presidential, and we can, yes. And we are doing it our best to keep it that way, but it has been a very exciting time, and you're going to get to hear about what it's been like with these debates on democracy and some of the really difficult situations that people have been in post-election. I hope that none of you who are not from Arizona will have to go through it, but there's some real words of warning as well from what has happened in this community, and real threats to some very brave elected officials who you'll hear from today who defended democracy in a way that I think I would have never thought possible years ago. This county will be home to the John McCain Library, and one of its themes will be protecting democracy at home. When it was, I think, originally conceived, we would have thought abroad, but this is a conversation that we need to have here as well. So we're excited to welcome you for this important conversation. But since those are some of the more difficult topics, I thought I might also touch on good news. We thought last week was going to be a really important week where we would be discussing semiconductors in Arizona. That did not work out for us. But on Monday, we announced what would be the largest foreign direct investment ever in our country's history on a greenfield site will be in Phoenix, Arizona. So that is TSMC. They are the folks who make the chips for Apple. If you were smart enough to buy NVIDIA stock, they are making your chips, and we should hang out. So we have long been, as a region, an epicenter for semiconductor manufacturing with companies like Intel here. But the expansion that was announced on Monday would not have been possible without the Biden administration and the CHIPS Act, which is helping bring back American manufacturing and helping us be competitive with other national governments, which invest much more heavily than we have been doing. And so on Monday of last week, awkwardly during the eclipse, the administration announced that they would be doing a major funding partnership with TSMC, and it will be $65 billion, they announced, in Phoenix. That's long been a priority of mine. I bought my first home in Phoenix in 2008 in the single-month peak of the market. And if you remember 2008, Arizona was hit very deeply by the downturn in the housing market. At the time, we were more dependent on the real estate sector than Detroit on automotive, so it was the big show in town. A lot of our big jobs, a lot of our publicly traded larger companies were in home building, and it hurt us even more deeply than most of the rest of the country. So we had bigger declines and took longer to build out. And I was reflecting on my poor real estate decisions and just thinking about how we can learn from that. I worked before running for office at the electric utility and economic development, so helping companies that want to grow here or locate here. And it really, the downturn in real estate really impacted me personally. I knew so many people who lost their homes to foreclosure, and it was a tough, tough time. So I came out of that wanting us to never have to go through that again. And that is one of the reasons we focus so much on advanced manufacturing for this community. So in 2019, shortly after I was elected, I did my first international trip, was to Taiwan to try to recruit TSMC here. We knew they wanted to come somewhere in the United States, and we thought we were competitive. We have the largest engineering program at Arizona State University and a good backdrop in semiconductors. But it was intimidating first trip for sure as mayor. The site that we were pitching for them literally had tumbleweeds on it, and it was next to Ben Avery's shooting range, which we weren't sure how well that would translate in Taiwan for trying to say we want you to build the most competitive semiconductor chips in the country right next to a shooting range. But luckily, with the combination of great people and other amenities, we were able to overcome some of the marketing challenges we had and get them to commit. And that's something that's changing this community right now for the better. So since they've announced, we've had 23 other companies come to Phoenix in semiconductors, and from elementary school up, we're seeing changes with more focus on STEM and math and science careers. Our community colleges have just done a heroic effort to bring new folks into training for these jobs, and it's all hands on deck. The high schools have several new programs around semiconductors, so we're really trying to make sure that this is a job area where the people who live here now will have the chance to go into higher wage jobs, and we hope have a much more diverse economy than what would have been the trend if we had just stayed on the path with a heavy emphasis on home building and the development industry, which continues to be strong. We are one of the markets that's seeing the most new housing starts, although have huge demand and have a lot of work to do in that area. And you're going to hear from our economic development director about some of the more innovative strategies and technologies that we've been using to try to address that demand, because as you heard, we have been the fastest growing city for many years, and the supply has not kept up with demand. I was also asked to say just a few lighter words about some things you can do while you are here, since we started with some heavier topics. We are the sunniest big city in the country, and so reasonable to expect good days of weather, and I think so far we are delivering. I promised Debbie when she was deciding to come here, no snowpocalypse, and I feel like I have delivered. Yes. So we have more acres of parks than any other city in the United States, and you are quite near some of our fabulous mountain parks, including Camelback, which is named because it looks like the silhouette of a camel. So if you enjoy outdoors and brought appropriate shoes and a water bottle, highly recommend a morning hike. We also have wonderful food here. As mayor recently, I have made many sports bets with other mayors. Our teams have done a good job getting in championships, but I've not won any sports bets as mayor. So I thought I might share you some of my culinary decisions for what we've been betting on sports. So our Arizona Diamondbacks made the World Series, but did not win, and so I sent to my friend, the mayor of Arlington, Pizzeria Bianco, which is fabulous local pizza. I'm trying to see how many people are from New York to see if I'm gonna get booed when I say this. Okay. So an outlet in New York said it was the best pizza in the country. We have skepticism. But you can't argue unless you go try it. If you watch Netflix, The Chef's Table, it was the inaugural pizza episode, and they really talk about how they were very pioneering in getting the most local ingredients, so they grow their own wheat. They get their cheese hyper-local as well, so highly recommend that, and the mayor of Arlington did enjoy the pizza. We also have wonderful Mexican food, and so we have also, with my Milwaukee bet, when the Milwaukee Bucks beat the Phoenix Suns, we sent Barrio Cafe and Carolina's Mexican food, so those are also great ones you might want to check out while you are here. And we're in the middle of selecting a city cocktail right now. So the Phoenix, will be the cocktail of the city. And not far from here at Merck Bar, you can try the 4 finalists. We announced the final 4 during the final 4 last week. So they are no surprise for the Southwest tequila and mezcal-based spirits. And we'd love to have your perspective on what should be the city cocktail. It was a little inspired by the Manhattan. And you may all have known this, but I didn't. The recipe for the Manhattan is 212, similar to the area code of Manhattan. So part of the reason we're doing this is we have great food and beverage, but are not well known for it, so we're trying to have fun ways to be able to share those stories. And so if you want to help us with our voting, our area code is 602 here, and so on June 2nd, there's no 6 shots of anything in any of these recipes. Yeah, Debbie's lawyer would never forgive me if, but we're gonna announce it on 602 Day, which is named after our area code, what is the Phoenix cocktail. And we hope maybe someday in your cities you'll be able to order the Phoenix. So if any of my fellow mayors who are here, you wanna do a reciprocal thing, well, we'll do the Boise and you do the Phoenix, then we can really spread how we have great food and beverage in all of our different cities. We also are doing a lot of exciting things on transportation, and would invite you to join me tomorrow. I'm going to be on one of the panels on transportation. We right now are going through a huge expansion of our public transit system and got the first full funding grant agreement of the Biden administration to grow our light rail system, which was a project that was really special to my predecessor, Greg Stanton, as Debbie recognized, a great New Deal leader, and one that I am working hard to continue. But we're also doing a lot on a variety of different automation, and so we are the largest autonomous vehicle zone in the world. And the easiest to get a ride in right now is Waymo, so you can even get them through the Uber app if you want to try an autonomous vehicle. But we have several companies in that area as well, and they are all electric, which we hope will help with some of our climate change and air quality related challenges. We are very much on the forefront of the climate challenge here in Phoenix. We had a very difficult summer and are trying to do as much as we can to have strategies around heat. So we have a permanent office that works year-round on heat here and does everything from cooling centers to tree planting to cool pavement. Not far from here, you can see areas where what was black asphalt is now a much lighter gray to be more reflective, and that helps us with our overnight temperatures because the black asphalt really maintains heat and has made it difficult to cool the city. So we have over 100 miles, which we think might be the largest such program in the world in that area, and it's still hot in the summer in Phoenix, but we're trying to really design the city differently. You'll see some of our downtown later, and we're moving towards a program where 70% of the sidewalks should be covered with shade, which will also make it more comfortable. We'll be tonight in Roosevelt Row, which is our arts district. The National Urban Planning Society named it one of the great places in America, and I hope you'll get a chance to see some of the great murals and just artistic environment in that area, and it's a really fun, special place for a lot of our young people. They say that's where they fall in love with the city of Phoenix, so hopefully you will get to see what makes that area special as well and just have a wonderful time. Even though we're on the forefront of some really tough issues, we also have a lot of great things going on here, and we hope you'll leave understanding that while our abortion laws are 160 years backwards, we are doing many forward-thinking things as well, and we will vote in November on a much more modern law that would protect women. So we are trying to address that as well. The territorial area ban is not yet in effect, but unfortunately next week we would see that go into place, although Democrats across the board are working on different solutions in that area, including going back to the courts and perhaps passing legislation in that area. And there's some Arizona legislators here who can give you updates on that. We will next turn to some of the great heroes of the last presidential election, and I am excited to introduce a great friend of mine, Adrian Fontes, who has been on the front lines of protecting our community as a U.S. Marine, doing prosecution, and then as Maricopa County Recorder, and now our Secretary of State. So in Maricopa County, the Recorder and the Board of Supervisors run the elections, and they were very much on the forefront of very difficult disputes. The main election office is in the city of Phoenix, and so Adrian and I got to work very closely together on how to do safety around the elections. I never, as the mayor of a U.S. city, thought we would have to talk about preparing for people who were trying to overthrow an election, but we did, and it was wonderful to have a steady voice in the recorder's office, really trying to make sure we were transparent and led with data and talk to people about the great protections behind the 2020 presidential election, and to be able to think strategically about how we keep people safe during that type of crisis. So I appreciated Adrian Fontes' partnership in that area. Since that time, he went on to be elected statewide and administer our elections. If you saw the cover of Time magazine, he was on it, given how important he is in protecting democracy in this country, and he has done a great job modernizing our elections, explaining to people what we do and how we do it, and just being a great voice of reason in a difficult time. So please welcome one of our great leaders of democracy, Adrian Fontes.
Thank you. Welcome to Phoenix, and a special thank you very much to those of you who joined us last evening. We had a great time over at my place, and those of you who missed it, you're going to have to wait till you guys come back next time. I'm Adrian Fontes. I'm Arizona's 21st Secretary of State, and we're going to have a great discussion here for a moment, but I did want to take just a couple of minutes and really sort of set the much bigger picture at a philosophical level. Throughout human history, leadership has always been critical and important, and just up until almost 250 years ago, the leader was really determined mostly either by heredity or violence, and in some cases both. And the great experiment that was launched on the North American continent was really, and I should say does really continue to remain an experiment. We are working hard to try to figure out how those tendencies that are established well are tendencies towards heredity and giving folks family credit just because of the luck of birth, or violence towards a strong leader, not necessarily reasoned or rational, but just looking towards strength in leadership, how those things are so embedded in our narratives, they're so embedded in our culture, they're so embedded in humanity that we're trying to wrestle our way away from them as our founders tried to do. It was the age of reason. It was a time when data and science were being born. It was a moment when we were trying to rip ourselves away from the mythologies of human history that propelled us into a sort of organization. And if we look to the way people lived, if we look to the quality of a daily life, for the vast majority of humanity, at the time of the inception of this republic, we're looking at a very, very different landscape. We're looking at a time and a place where the very tiny few had privilege, but none of them lived as well as the vast majority of us do now. And in our own nation now, we hear calls for the re-examination of democracy. Well, maybe it's not so great after all, right? Maybe it's time to get to the one strong leader so we all just don't have to worry about it so much anymore, because all of this thinking and looking at stuff and reading is such a pain in the tail. Those voices aren't going anywhere for a while. And so what we need to do is make sure that we not only make the case, but we continue to work towards revamping this experiment, re-energizing our own folks out there in the world and letting them understand why this is so important. And right here in Arizona, we made the case in 2022 that defeated election deniers in a U.S. Senate race, in a governor's race, in a secretary's race, in an attorney general's race, and in what was once the bastion of Joe Arpaio's SB 1070 rounding up of quote-unquote illegals. We saw Democrats sweep the top offices with the following arguments. I made many of them myself. But let me frame this. We didn't make it just to our own voters. We didn't just make the argument to our own people. We reached across the aisle and we spoke directly and firmly with our political opponents, but we didn't frame it as political opponent. We framed it as co-operators within this society. Now, on the panel in a moment, joining me will be a good friend of mine, Bill Gates, a supervisor from Maricopa County, and one of the folks who reported on us will be moderating. But the message that we sent was a clear message. And in most simple terms, it was this. Yes, as a Democrat, you can call me a lefty, you can call me a liberal, that's fine. And there are these, I'll use my left side. There are these warm and fuzzies that I want. I do want people to feel good. I do want people to live well. I do want the majority of society to have dignity and respect. And that means I need social programs, but I can't do this without opportunity, without prosperity, without economic foundations in our communities that are going to allow for a reasonably large enough tax base to take care of these other things. We can do all of it. I believe that we can do all of it. It's like the president says, we are the United States of America, and there isn't anything that we cannot do if we put our minds to it. That's a rough paraphrase, but you get the point. And I challenged the business classes who tend to the other political side. I challenged many of these folks who tend to the other side to consider where in an authoritarian regime, where in the few totalitarian spaces left on this planet can you find opportunity? Can you have someone from a lower caste or economic system rise to the top of leadership? Where in authoritarian systems do you find the sorts of debate that bring about innovation? the sorts of attitude that brings about the capacity to have opportunity in the first place. It only happens in liberal democracies. And those folks listened, because I also told them this. One of the key pillars and institutions of our democracy are an independent judiciary. And every time you sign a lease, every time you invent a new product, every time a purchase order goes out, every time you write a check, you expect the legal system that backs that up to be there. You take it for granted that when you make a promise, there is a contract that will be upheld. And I told my friends in the chambers of commerce and in the various other spaces that concentrate really on money and profits, you can't guarantee any of that in an authoritarian regime. You can only guarantee your economic prosperity in a democracy. And that's why we must protect democracy. Because at the end of the day, we all know the business of America is business. And that's not a bad thing. And when we run away from the reality of that notion, that not so complex idea that opportunity only exists where freedom exists, that the capacity to rise only exists when there is room to rise, that's where we become powerful. That's where we can welcome more folks into the fold. And that's why we were successful in Arizona. We are, as the mayor said, at the forefront of so many things political. And I think one of those things is making sure that we reach out across all of the political aisles and we hit folks where it matters, in what interests them. And we can continue to do that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come here today and to do this. I think, am I bringing the panel up? I am. Okay. Let's bring the panel up. Can I get... Yes, I just told Debbie I'm kind of a moron. I don't want to forget anybody. First and foremost, I'd like to bring up one of our unsung heroes, and this is someone who operates at the most local level, the place where it actually happens, the place where I came from. It is county government. In Arizona, the counties run our elections, and in Colorado, Jefferson County. I went to the University of Denver for law school, so it's Jeffco. Their clerk and recorder, Amanda Gonzalez. Ladies and gentlemen, come on up. Yeah. I did go to DU. I'm a pioneer. They have the goofiest logo, and then they switched it when I was there. Also with us coming onto the stage, from the Washington Post, formerly of the Arizona Republic. She keeps us accountable and has delivered a gun punch to me once or twice, but I still like her because she's very smart. Yvonne Winget-Sanchez over on the end. She'll be moderating. And then I will last introduce a very dear friend, and I tell you what, folks, if ever there was a couple of folks who really, really did work together across the aisles, behind the scenes, and made things happen before bipartisanship was even talked about in a popular way, because it was pretty rough back in those days. My dear, dear friend and former chairman, are you currently chair? No. You guys switch up, I can never tell. From the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, Arizona's Bill Gates.
Can you all hear me? Oh, it works. Thank you all for coming and participating in such an important conversation about physical threats and cyber threats and what all of this means ahead of 2024. It feels like we've all become so accustomed to having this conversation, right? It's sort of baked into the equation of what it means to administer elections. And we're going to focus most of the conversation on those physical and cyber threats. But there are other sort of worst case scenarios that is the space that we all sort of tend to live in that I think are also important that we highlight today. So many of the concerns from the past 4 years remain the same. This potential for cyber attacks, the targeting of voting systems or websites that maybe report unofficial, inaccurate results, attacks, either foreign or domestic. Conspiracies continue to be amplified. by those who are seeking to undermine confidence in the outcome for one reason or another. Former President Donald Trump is already laying the groundwork to say that the 2024 election is on its way to being rigged. We know that election workers like yourselves are bracing for another pretty treacherous year, and we also know that you have no room for error. Can you walk us through how the administration of the 2024 election will look different this year from a voter perspective compared to 2020?
I'll go really quickly. We just don't know, Yvonne, and I think one of the reasons why we don't know how it will look is because of, I'll just start with the big one, right? Generative artificial intelligence. We know there will be misinformation, we know there will be disinformation, we know there will be malinformation. This is the same playbook, it's the same sort of stuff. We've heard it before, we've seen it before in election administration. We understand that there may be different manifestations of a variety of different kinds of physical threats to our voters. In Arizona, in Maricopa County, we saw folks with long rifles standing by ballot drop boxes. We have had our own election warehouse in 2020 when I was administering that election, seized on by armed crowds. These things are not new for us anywhere here. What might be different, however, is with the outset of AI and its capacity to much more broadly, much more deeply, and much more quickly spread these messages. In a prior engagement, I heard somebody describe the poison of sort of the misinformation and such as the same poison in a different vial. Well, I think that's a little inaccurate. I think this is the same poison, but it's not in a vial. It's in a swimming pool. And it's that much of a difference. And I think from the voter's perspective, there's going to be a lot more and spread much more quickly. So it's going to be that much harder to respond. Bill?
First of all, thanks for having me. Great to be here, and welcome to Maricopa County. You were in District 3, by the way, my district, so very proud to have you here at the Canby. I think, if we're comparing this to 2020, we had no idea what we were going into as 2020 came. Adrian talks about the folks armed outside of our tabulation center. We didn't know that was coming. We had no idea. Fortunately, we had an incredible team, the board working with Adrian, working with our sheriff, Paul Penzone, to protect our workers. Then fast forward to 2022, we had even more threats, physical threats. Folks showing up, as Adrian referred to, armed at our drop boxes. People coming and taking pictures of our election workers at the end of 14 and 16-hour days, taking pictures of them, taking pictures of their license plates. So we have made so many changes to protect our workers and to protect the vote centers. But it's very important to understand that for the voter, it's probably not going to look a little different other than the obvious thing from 2020. We had our COVID protocols in place, so we're not going to have those in place. But it's important that while our voters feel protected and safe when they come to vote centers, that they not approach a militarized compound. That is very important. We do not want anyone to feel discouraged from voting because of the presence of law enforcement or anyone else. So we've been very sensitive to that. So it's going to look very similar to the voter, but on the back end, it has been well publicized that we had some challenges in the 2022 election here on Election Day. We had about a third of the vote centers where we had issues with the printers that didn't allow folks to feed their ballots into the tabulators. No one was disenfranchised. They still had the opportunity to have those votes counted later at central count. But we at the Board of Supervisors have invested $15 million since just 2022 to ensure we don't have issues with those printers, and in addition to expanding our operations to allow the vote count to go as quickly as possible while still maintaining accuracy. So I think the short answer is, it doesn't look a lot different, but there are significant changes on the back end, and then also we at the board, and I would argue, I think elections officials across the country have redoubled their commitment to transparency. because we do know so many people are looking. Unfortunately, there are so many election conspiracies out there that we all have to raise our voices to respond to. And frankly, to the extent that people do have questions about our election system, it is incumbent upon those of us who are operating this system to educate our voters to address all of the reasonable questions that are raised in good faith.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I'll talk about some of the things I'm optimistic about, right? I don't know about you all, but I think that my 2024 bingo card is a lot more accurate than my 2020 bingo card, right? We know that some of these things are coming. And we're better prepared. So in Colorado, we've passed legislation that better protects election administrators. And I will say that I am the third largest county in Colorado. I've got about 450,000 voters. And for our smaller elections, we bring on about 300 temporary workers. I'll be hiring 900 temporary workers this November. And usually, we have a hard time finding all of our poll workers. We call them election judges in Colorado. And people understand now that they have to stand up for their democracy. They understand that we can't just sit back and expect that it will be okay, right? I think that January 6th was a wake-up call for so many of us, and that includes election workers. And so when I'm out, at the county fair or whatever event, we're talking about the need for people to come help run our elections, right? Because it's not just me running them. It's your neighbors and your friends and the people that you go to church with. And it's one of the first questions I get is, well, is it safe, right? They saw the news. They know that we have had folks who have been armed. We explain the new protections. We explain that it is safe, and they sign up, right? They want to protect our democracy. We filled all of those spots for our June primary faster than we had ever filled the spots for any other election. And so I think one of the things that will be different is that we know what we're going into this time, we're ready, and people are gonna stand up for our democracy.
So that's the good news. You have people who are willing to participate. Bad news is one of the trends that we have seen emerge is this exodus of election workers since 2020. This is very important. These are the people who are at the heart of the democratic process. The job's always been demanding, and you've been doing it since before it was sexy to do so, I think some would say. You've got this added layer of the harassment, of the threats to lives. And it's resulted in a pretty profound loss of institutional knowledge and experience. Can you talk a bit about how that loss of institutional knowledge is affecting your operations ahead of 2024, and what are you doing to ensure that these people are adequately prepared on the cyber front and on the potential for physical violence front ahead of 2024?
So we're doing a lot. So I'll keep it tight. We've lost senior election officials, either the elected recorder or appointed director, in 12 out of 15 Arizona counties since 2020. And in some counties we've lost both, and in some counties we've lost more than one of each. So there's been a lot of turnover. As the chief election administrator for this state, we have to address this, and so we bolstered our training, our election officer certification, which happens in odd-numbered years, and really made it much more of an experiential thing where people can actually go back to the training. So we've actually done something as simple as record all of our training and make it available online for all of those election officials so they can go back. Because sitting in a classroom for 5 days in a row, you're not going to catch it all. You can go back. We've bolstered the network of support that we have to include bringing in CISA from the Department of Homeland Security, physical security agents and cybersecurity agents to go survey each of our 15 counties and bring to the county officials, not to my office, but to the county officials, a survey of where they may or may not have shortcomings so that they can address those chiefly. And then what we've done in the Secretary of State's office is back that up with tiger teams who can go out to this county or that county and work on their number one priority is bulletproof glass. Okay, we're going to go help find some money and get a Tiger team out there to do the design and implementation. These folks need a separate set of software to help defend their information technology systems. We'll set a Tiger team out to do that. So our establishment of Tiger teams, including a little different from that, is a program that we're starting in 1 July, which is a fellowship where we're paying college and university students, I think it's $15,000 to stick with the county as a permanent employee of the county and put them in there. We're working with our colleges and universities to get them credit and this stipend and give them those extra hands so that the folks who are there can free up and not just have to do the busy work. So we're really augmenting their on-the-ground work. In some places in rural Arizona, we're even providing housing to really bolster that workforce. So we're doing everything that we can, and that's just a quick survey of backing up the local folks at the county level. These guys don't need backup. They got all the deep pockets in the world. No, I'm just kidding. We're doing everything that we can to work with them to really push that forward. But it's useful, I think, and I'll just make a plug for my team, that we have county officials or former county officials, a lot of them, in our office. So they know what questions to ask. They know what our systems look like. They understand the people and the personalities. And that is an insight that is absolutely invaluable to really be able to reach down into the most local level and support them and be the tie-in to the highest level. Like, for example, our National Guard. Arizona National Guard is monitoring every single one of our election systems 24/7 right now in conjunction with the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center. So we're monitoring, we're helping, we're training, we're doing everything that we can to level up because of that loss of experience.
Yeah, Adrian is right that we have been very fortunate at Maricopa County to have a lot of the same team for the last 3 elections. We in Maricopa County, we share the election responsibilities at the Board of Supervisors with our county recorder, Stephen Richer, obviously was Adrian before. Some of the biggest losses of people in senior leadership have been to Adrian. So Adrian, hands off. Enough of taking our people. No. We work together, and we are extremely grateful for the support that we get at the state level. But it is true, you know, in Maricopa County, we need thousands of people to run our elections. And one of the things that we've done at the Board of Supervisors level is allowing Maricopa County employees, and we've got over 13,000 employees who work for Maricopa County across our 50 lines of business, and we give them, you know, the day off. We give them the opportunity to volunteer with the elections. So the Maricopa County team writ large has come together in this effort. You know, as you were saying, really people understanding the importance of this, and I've seen that as well, who are running into the fire, you know, and understand some of the challenges and want to make a difference and want to protect this democracy, and I'm so grateful for that support.
And so I was elected in 2022. My background is that I was the executive director of Colorado Common Cause, so running a voting rights nonprofit before this. I wrote some of the laws that I'm now implementing, so let's hope I did it right. We'll see. But, you know, I don't know, and I can say this in part because our senior leadership team still has more than 100 years of election administrative experience on it, even though I am new. But I don't know that the measure of success for an election administrator is that they've had, you know, 20 or 30 years of experience, right? The measure of success is this person deeply committed to our democratic values, right? Is this person somebody that is willing to engage in new technology to keep up with the times, to keep up with the modern threats? Is this person deeply connected to their community and listening to their voters for what they actually need? We all know that our elections have not always met the needs of all of our citizens, right? It has not always been an inclusive and welcoming place. And so I think that our modern democracy really needs a new kind of leadership in some of these election administrative spaces, right? I don't know that 30, 40 years ago, you all would be sitting at a conference talking about our democracy and election administration and hearing from an under 40 queer Latina, right? These spaces were not always open to people like us. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity as we look at the future and what the leadership in an election and democracy space looks like.
When you talk about looking ahead for 2024, I think one of the most underrated consequences for people like you was that heavy mental toll, that the threats and the harassment. I mean, you talked about the scene outside of the county tabulation center in 2020, armed protesters. One of your workers could have gotten pulled out into that crowd, was surrounded by some of those people. You have both been targeted by harassing communications, threats. They've come to your home. You've been subjected to similar online behavior. From that vantage point, what are you guys doing this cycle to help prepare and to equip your workers for those cyber and physical threats that maybe not so long ago no one would have thought, really could have had consequences like what we've seen now?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand the nature of the threat, and we have to be smarter about what is and what isn't a threat because of the volume. And unfortunately, we actually have a full-time FTE. We've got a threat assessment officer in the Secretary of State's office that serves to assess threats as against election officials across the state. And it's a sad state of affairs when you've got to have a full-time employee to analyze all of the threats that are coming in. We have regular threat briefings. I have a 4-person security team, including 2 of the people that I stole from Bill in Maricopa County. Shamelessly, they're amazing. I had originally hired them when I was recorder, so they're really mine. But we're really concentrating on, I think the thing that we're doing right now is concentrating on identifying the boogeyman and showing light to it. It's the enemy that you don't know that's the most scary. It's the uncertain thing. It's the thing you just are unfamiliar with that pops up that is the scariest. And so it's sort of inoculation on the one hand, but it's also awareness for prevention on the other hand. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure we have our hands around what the threats are and where they are. And we're actually, I'll say this publicly, we're actively trying to figure out spaces on the backside to be able to provide better psychological and emotional support if necessary for our employees.
Is that new? Sorry to interrupt.
That's new, Yvonne. It's not really breaking news,
smell a story.
but we're thinking about it. I keep forgetting the Washington Post is on the stage. This is just an intimate gathering of friends, after all. And so, we have to think about the possibility that that's going to become necessary. And we have to think about our people, because at the end of the day, this is just about people. And so just attacking the problem isn't going to be enough as we push forward. We also have to make sure that our folks are well cared for and maintain, their own capacity to execute.
And I would say, our experience is very similar. We've partnered with the Secretary of State's office, partnered with law enforcement now for several years on this effort. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I've tried to do is humanize this whole situation. People who get on, these keyboard warriors who get on and say some of the most vile things that you can imagine. And it's one thing for me, I'm an elected official. I mean, I kind of maybe signed up for this. But I'm talking about the fact, because we're focused on transparency, because we have live stream cameras, people go on, they see things occurring in the election office, they think it is evidence of a crime, and then they find out that person's name, and then they berate that person online, getting their email address, and it is awful. And I refuse to be quiet about this. One of the things about people in elections is they tend to kind of keep their heads down, right? they don't want to be part of the story, because they shouldn't be. It should be about the candidates, and they should just be administering. But what I've seen over the past few years is, in my opinion, taking this, just saying it's part of the job, and it's not part of the job, and it's not good for us. It's not good for our mental health. It's not good for our physical health, and that's why I've spoken out about it. And I've been very pleased to have people come to me and say, hey, I'm happy you spoke out because it made me realize where I'm at. I've had some incredible conversations with people who have said that sort of opened a window for me to then having a conversation with my family. So we need to do that. But it's more than just that. We have also pushed back on when this speech crosses the line into becoming a crime. And at Maricopa County, at the state of Arizona, we have cooperated with the Attorney General's office, with the Department of Justice, and prosecuted these cases, many of us, because it's not right. It's a crime, and we have to speak out. And I would argue, especially my Republican colleagues and I, have to push back on this. It's not acceptable. This isn't free speech. This isn't the way that we treat people who have committed their lives to public service and running our elections. But, you know, we can't stop now, and we have been very clear about our team that they need to take care of themselves. This has been a hamster wheel we've been on since 2020. So we've really encouraged our team to get away, spend time with their family, take a vacation, because we know the next few months are not going to be easy. But it's so important that everyone be on top of their game for what's coming.
Yeah. There's a lot of other female elected officials in this room, and I'm sure that you all sympathize that, I'm sorry, I actually didn't sign up for those very graphic GIFs on Twitter, right? And there are some men on Twitter today that have some big feelings about my earrings, right? My election director didn't sign up to be doxxed, right? But we put up with it because it's worth it, and our democracy is worth it, and we know that we have to do it. And it's, you know, we've looked in Colorado, we've passed some really strong legislation to protect election administrators. We've made it easier and more convenient for election workers to have their information pulled off our public websites. So, you know, they don't have to have their information on our assessor's website anymore, for example. So those things were really important. We've also looked at, it sounds like you've done similar work, of how can we support the mental health of our election workers. And I also think that community is just a huge part of it, right? When do I feel loneliest or most threatened? Well, it's when it's 3 a.m. and I've been scrolling Twitter for too long, right? Because you get sucked into that as if that is reality, right? Reality is actually this room. Reality is my election judges who work in bipartisan teams and end up going on walks together in the off season and ask each other about their grandkids, even though they're not the same party. Like, I have to keep reminding myself that that is reality, and reminding my staff that that is reality, and that we have their backs and we can support them. Because if you let yourself just get sucked into this, it's a really, really scary place to live.
Most people do not live in this space that you have all become accustomed to living in. And this very complex, very complicated election law, election procedure world. States, obviously, jurisdictions do things differently, right? Drop boxes that might be used in one county are not used in another, let alone, you know, state. There are changes to carrying out early voting, mail-in voting. The equipment that you use to check in on election day, how votes are counted, the red mirage that we might see here in Arizona, we won't see, for example, in another state. The average person just doesn't pay attention to this until it is election day or in the days after election day. That really ripe window where conspiracies really do seem to take hold and false information takes hold. How do you get the public? Because this seems to be where the rubber really meets the road, right? Where we start talking about the artificial intelligence. the willingness to believe. We talk about the supply of misinformation. We talk less about the demand, right? This appetite for misinformation and to believe mistruths or untruths. How do you combat that in a very meaningful way? And you are smiling, so I think you have something to say.
I certainly do. And I challenged one of your colleagues at the New York Times with exactly this when he came to talk to me in my office about 2 weeks ago. And the question was a variant of what you asked, and he said, how do you rebuild trust and confidence in a system with so much of this nonsense going on out there? I think that's a fair-ish paraphrase to where you're going. We cannot do any of this alone. There's no amount of money that's going to be able to get the public service announcements out there and do all this other sort of thing that folks are going to pay a lot of attention to. American democracy, as I mentioned in our opening, includes a variety of different institutions, and one of them is the Fourth Estate. And since we know each other, I'm going to pick on you real quick here as a representative of every bit of all of the media, good, bad, and indifferent in the world. Okay, so it's all on you now. We just ran a statewide election in Arizona. Our presidential preference election. It was a week or two after Super Tuesday. Maricopa County did great. Pima County did great. Coconino did great. Navajo, Mojave, Santa Cruz, Gila, Greenlee, Graham, Yuma, La Paz, all those counties did great. Amazing work. Work that would confirm the truth that our elections run well. Work that would be able to rebuild confidence in our electorate that, yes, Arizona runs great elections. And nobody covered it. None of our friends in the Fourth Estate bothered to help us do the thing that they would criticize us for not doing enough to do. And I say this with all politeness and generosity to my friend. We are in this thing called democracy together. I can't tell the story by myself because my legislature won't give me the money to tell it. Maricopa doesn't have the money to tell it. Jeffco doesn't have the money to tell it. We have to have our friends in the media, and if you're listening, celebrate the successes as much as you would give credence or credibility to the questions that you may know are illegitimate in the first place. The good work that so many of you do, whether it's transportation stuff in your cities, whether you're making sure that the buses are running on time and that the water systems work, and all of the little things that we do, that doesn't go and get celebrated until there's a problem. And in the single most critical area, I would argue, in our democracy, the one thing that would allow a free press to exist, our democracy, we're not getting the lift up that I think we would need. And I'm not going to put it all on the media. We certainly could do a better job getting out there and talking about these things. But humanizing it is a strategy that I actually adopted from Bill, because I used to just swing. Now sometimes I put a hand out. We have a whole bunch of different ways of doing this, but we sure could use a little help.
So I agree with what Adrian said, but I'll respectfully disagree just a little bit, because during the PPE, I was down at Maricopa County, and we actually did a ton of interviews with local media. So I was grateful. They were out there. They were reporting on it. Certainly not the attention it would get if there were problems, but local media has been absolutely amazing. And I tell this story. I say, in Republican school, they teach us not to talk to the media. But actually, we at the Board of Supervisors have taken the opportunity in the past few years to get to know the local media, to tell them the story of Maricopa County elections, and I would argue they've done an incredible job of getting the word out. I don't have 1 million or 2 million followers on X to compete with those who spread conspiracy theories, but by doing 16 press conferences like we did with the recorder's office, with the sheriff, in 2022, we were able to get the story out there. There's some people who don't want to hear the truth, but for those people who have open minds and open hearts, for them, getting this information out there, even if it just allows them, they may be the only one at that table, that dinner table, the family dinner table, who reads this stuff. But if it gives them some ammunition to tell the truth to their family members who have shut down, this is a long battle, I'm sorry to say. This isn't going to be over at the end of 2024. There are people who have completely lost faith, but it's got to start somewhere. And I feel very privileged to be in one place where it has started, where we have pushed back against these narratives, and we'll continue to do it. But the only way that we can do it is by not getting discouraged, to continue to get up, to push for further transparency, to push for, more live stream cameras and get the facts out there. But I am truly privileged to have a partner in Adrian Fontes and another partner in Stephen Richer, and then of course my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors who are really good at telling this story. And that's what we've got to do. This is a story. It's not facts and figures. It's the story of American democracy that will hopefully bring these people back in the fold.
Don't y'all wish that shot of you standing in your election center, Clerk Gonzalez stands here, everything's going well, right? Just wish that was as shareable as all of the other stuff. I will just share, one of the things that we have done is we've been much more active about getting out in the community. I've hired a full-time outreach staff, bilingual, that goes to people, right? And we just know that not everybody feels good about coming to our big, scary government office. So we're at the Kite Festival, we're at the Pozole Festival, we're registering voters, we're recruiting judges, we're talking about elections and what's happening. We've increased the number of tours that we give of our election facility by about 3x. So that guy that sends the open records request every week, we're like, Bill, you should just come on down, hang out with us. And we really are inviting more folks in. I will say, unfortunately, the tour usually ends with, okay, everything looks good around here, but I don't know about Georgia, right? Whatever the thing is. But I think that is sort of how we chip away at some of that, is we're inviting people closer in and we're going out to where they are.
Another thing that would be great if you could invite people in would be the artificial intelligence tabletops that you guys are doing. I know that these are closed door, low key. This is an appeal to let the press in to get a sense of how you guys are preparing on that front. But obviously AI is capable of creating an endless number of fraudulent fake images. They can be very difficult to detect, easy to believe. You guys are all training, gearing up to combat this in a way that we have not seen before. Outside of these tabletops that I jokingly express frustration in
You're
that
not
we can't
joking
attend.
about it. You're frustrated.
I am frustrated that we can't get in. But can you give us a sense, voters who might not be as aware of the damage that these things could do, different sets of scenarios that could wreak havoc for your jurisdictions in 2024, and spell those out for us, walk us through what those scenarios could be and what you are doing to prepare for them, sort of pretty quickly, because we're gonna move to audience questions.
Yeah, first and foremost, I wouldn't answer that with any specifics. And the reason I wouldn't answer it with any specifics is because we take a lot of time trying to figure out what the bad guys might do, and the last thing I want to do in a public forum is say, hey, you ought to try this. Right, so I can't get into specifics, but there's a lot of the little hooks that we've already seen, and I'll just give one example since we're running short. In New Hampshire, right, there was a deep fake of President Biden calling up Democratic voters, and he said, save your vote for November. Don't vote, save it for November. Well, if you're not the highest, the most well-informed voter, that might seem a little bit confusing. I mean, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is the president calling. And the likeness on the phone was really good. That's one of the types of things, one of the many types of things that we might see to confuse voters, to inject doubt into the process, and to move folks away from the normal practice. And that really, I think, is the hook. Moving people away from the normal practice is the one giant category that we're really most concerned about.
How do you prepare for scenarios that you can't even imagine, that you don't even know could exist?
Yeah, I mean, well, what we have done at Maricopa County is our IT team has actually hired an AI expert. So is on board, is focused on this, not only as it relates to elections, but beyond. That is extremely important. And the thing that I will say to people is that I have looked at this, and I agree with Adrian's approach. I'm not going to talk about specific scenarios, but I would discourage people to get their election information from AI chatbots. There's a lot of people out there that are starting to use AI chatbots, particularly younger people, as like their Google search. I spent a whole day looking at these. They're not very good. Maybe they're going to get better, but where I encourage everyone to go are the local trusted voices. So for us, go to maricopa.gov, okay? Go to beballotready.vote. I mean, go to our websites, wherever you are. Don't rely upon the various places you can go out on the internet, because you don't know where they're scraping their information from. You don't know whatever certain objectives they're trying to pursue. Local trusted officials.
Give us a sense of the worst case scenario that you guys are prepared for when it comes to foreign interference, given the shifting dynamics ahead of 2024 on an international level, before we go to audience questions.
No. Again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. We have such an incredibly fragile system, and knowing the system as well as we know the system, we can imagine worst case scenarios that our adversaries can't even comprehend. And one of the strengths in the American electoral system is its diffusion and diversity. Jeffco doesn't use any of the same stuff that I think any of our counties use, or that the state of Arizona uses, and that's good. And your states and your counties use a lot of different types of systems too. That's a strength. Having a centralized system means there's one point of weakness. Having a whole bunch of different ways of doing things and different techniques and different tabulations, that is actually a strength in the American election administration system. So we can look at what's the worst case scenario for us, and we have run through many, many scenarios, but I respectfully will refuse to answer that question.
The one thing I would keep in mind is paper. Paper. You know, even with all of this, and I can tell you that all at election offices across the country, folks are very much focused on those threats from the outside with cybersecurity, but in the end, paper. I think it's nationally over 93% of votes are on paper, much higher percentage elsewhere. Paper, backups, audits. So I don't want to get too afraid of what might happen from these cyber attacks. We vote on paper, despite what some politicians in Arizona have said.
Questions from the audience? While we wait, perhaps for a question or two, outside of cyber security and physical attacks or the potential for violence, one of the biggest things that people do seem to be talking about is just the threat of local election boards, local county officials not canvassing the election results. We saw this here with Cochise County down south during the 2022 election. They had to be ordered by a judge to canvass those results. And even then, one Republican member refused to show up. I know you're familiar with this trend. There were other ruby red areas within Arizona that sort of flirted with the idea of not canvassing. Not doing so ahead of 2024 could force the state to miss certification deadlines, therefore jeopardizing Arizona's 11 electoral votes. Is this a realistic thing for folks to be concerned about, not just in Arizona, but nationally?
I think it's realistic. We've already seen it happen here. We've already fought against it. And just as a matter of background, the two supervisors who there was a 3-member board, the 2 county supervisors who voted no on the canvass ultimately got ordered the county got ordered. One of them flipped to a yes, the other one continued no, but both of them were indicted by the Attorney General. And so we're going to make that very clear to all of the individual supervisors across the state. I know Bill would never engage in such shenanigans, so he doesn't even have to pay attention to that, but there's no doubt in my mind that the threat of indictment for interference with an election official is looming. And you know, this is a real thing. If you don't do your job in your office that you've sworn to do, you should be held accountable one way or another. And in Arizona, we have an attorney general. Her name is Chris Mays. She's already levied 2 indictments, and I think she would be willing to look into the possibility of more if we were to experience that. So we're already looking at all of the options on the table, that being the most extreme.
Our Republican Party has not signed off on our canvass since 2020. And, you know, this is another one of those things that the story gets published. I'm like, oh, did we do the best job, right? So I think if you had asked me a dozen years ago, what is a canvass? Well, I don't know, right? The end of the election. And I don't fault most voters for not knowing every step of our election process, right? So in Colorado, at the beginning of our election, we do what we call a logic and accuracy test, where we do a lot of things, but we're testing, is our equipment accurately tabulating or tallying those paper ballots, because we have paper for everything, right? Then the election happens. We do a risk limiting audit, and so that's kind of the reverse. We kind of randomly pull a ballot, we double check, was that paper ballot tabulated in the same way on the computer, right? So that we know that those results are correct. And then at the end, we have this canvass process. And what our canvass board is supposed to be checking is, do the numbers ultimately line up, right? So did we count the number of ballots that were cast? And they make sure that we didn't count more ballots than we had voters, right? That's kind of what they're charged with. And every time that our party doesn't sign off, our Republican Party doesn't sign off, they never cite anything that actually has to do with what the canvass board is charged with. But the average voter has no idea what canvass is or what the board is charged with. And so when they see a headline that says, party doesn't sign off on election, right, that looks really scary. And so I think thinking about what are the ways that we can better communicate to the general public, what is this process? And is the thing that just happened actually cause for concern, right? Do I need to worry about my election because the chair in Jefferson County, Colorado didn't sign off, right? The answer is absolutely not, right? That this is just another tool for mis and disinformation, and that's the bigger picture that we need to keep our eyes on so that we are continuing to provide accurate information to voters. I think it's a scare tactic.
I think it's just important to add, agree with that, but it is incumbent upon us as the people doing the canvassing to ask questions if we have questions, for the parties to pursue litigation if they choose. I'm a big proponent of that. I used to be involved in that. But at some point, it has to be over, and I think it is important to the process that everyone who's serving on those canvass boards do eventually, you know, canvass if that is in fact appropriate. And when that doesn't happen, that only sows more distrust in the system.
I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, hi. So two-part. First, how are y'all using social media? Adrian, good to see you, brother. How are y'all using social media influencers to get information to communities of color, right? Because I think too often we're ignoring the fact that regardless how we feel about TikTok and Instagram, they are the 2 primary ways that young communities are learning. And then second is, it would be helpful to hear from each of you, what is the plan to provide awareness after Election Day? Regardless how we feel in this room, Donald Trump is going to say he won on Election Day, no matter what, right? And I was in Pennsylvania 4 years ago. The election didn't get called till Saturday. Folks forget that. So there's going to be a scenario where there's going to be incredible confusion where no matter what happens, people in all these different localities are going to be wondering what exactly did occur. So it'd be helpful to hear for what can be shared, the strategies on both of those 2 points. And thank you for what you're doing for the country, each of you.
Secretary Pontes.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yeah. Oh, were you gonna wait? Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, we are, the communication strategy that we've got is continuously developing. And the difficulty that we have here in Arizona is that we have a and I say this with respect to my colleague here, we have a Republican Party in charge at the legislature who doesn't want to educate voters. And they show us this by their priorities in their budgeting, right? If you want something done, you pay for it and it gets done. Maricopa County does a good job of doing that. So we're, to a great degree, hamstrung from being able to engage in just about any kind of voter education. Now, we do have a community engagement office that really tries to get out there. I personally go across the state directly into communities of color to try to do what I can. But the notion of getting and engaging social media influencers above and beyond sort of the de minimis, whatever we can do with what we've got, just isn't a part of our strategy right now, sadly. I do have one of my communication officers here. We might be able to work on that, and if you have any suggestions, Michael, that would be very useful, and thank you for the question. But that's about where we're at right now from the state's perspective and our capacity.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and this was just raised within the last week at another meeting about getting social media influencers involved, and I'm very open to that. We have stretched ourselves. You know, before 2020, Maricopa County was known as like, I think they do important stuff, but we don't really know what they do. It's very much a like keep our heads down. But we just kept getting kicked in the gut over and over again during the Cyber Ninja audit, our election workers accusing our folks of committing crimes, that we had to find our voices. As it relates to the end of the election, after the election, I think I'm a bit of an expert in that. In 2022, it takes between 10 to 13 days to have final results in Maricopa County. It's not because we're doing anything wrong. In fact, it's because we follow the law. It's because in 2022, 290,000 people dropped off their early mail-in ballot on Election Day, which then elongates the process. So that's number one. Number two is, this is sort of one of the ultimate swing states. Maricopa County is the ultimate swing county. So these races, the networks can't call them 4 days. And by the way, the network calling something isn't a thing. It's not a thing. I know we all think it is. The only thing is the canvas, right? The only thing is the certification. But we have gotten so obsessed with this. Has the network called this or not? So what we did in Maricopa County, and this goes way back to Helen Purcell days when she was our recorder, doing daily press conferences. They've just gotten a little bit bigger over the years, but where we tell the story to people, we go on social media. This is where we're at. This is how many ballots are yet to be counted. This is how close the race is, and we have to continue to do that. Unfortunately, we have so much pressure from certain people in our state saying, you need to, wrap this up, but what is going on? There's something going on. That's why we need to continue to tell people, this is how it's done, and I will take accuracy over speed every day when it comes to elections.
You might be shocked to know that my county commissioners in Jefferson County are not social media experts, nor are they experts in reaching communities of color. It's shocking. I don't understand. So TikTok is not an allowable app on a county device. So that is not a platform that we have, but I think it's something that's interesting to look at if the reality is this is where voters, and particularly voters who need more information, are. When I was at Common Cause, I ran the state's largest nonpartisan election protection hotline, and we did pair with influencers, right? Because an influencer, what that means is it's somebody you trust, right? It's somebody you look to. I buy the shoes from that girl on Instagram because I trust her to look cute, right? She's telling me what's good. And I think that that's the reality of how we need to be communicating with voters. So I was on like Instagram Lives with people who normally are talking about fashion, right? But there's so much about voting that our communities need to know. When I was doing trainings for the hotline, one of the attorneys was listening, and we were talking about how if you are somebody in Colorado who has a felony conviction, but you've finished your term of confinement, you are eligible to vote. And she was like, I didn't know that. And she calls her cousin right away. She's like, get down to a vote center. You're allowed to vote, right? We have to meet people. I mean, I hate the phrase, like meet people where they are, but we do. We have to meet them where they're actually spending their time in the spaces that they find trusting. So I absolutely think it should be something that we're all exploring. I also created a first of its kind for my county advisory committee. My youngest member is 15, my oldest member is in her 70s, and they are advising us on where should we be, how should we be talking about things. I'm a nerd who works in county government. I don't even use the words that normal people use anymore. And so I need the folks around me to say, this is how we do it better, this is how people can actually hear you.
Well, thank you all so much. Such great perspective and good story ideas. Thank you.
Thank you all for such an important discussion to get us going today. We will be following up on many of the points raised in today's panel with more information on ways to protect our election in November, so stay tuned for that. Go to newdealforum.org for more information and check out our democracy playbook. Before we move on to the next item on your program, I want to mention that one section of the democracy playbook focuses on civic engagement. Including recommendations for engaging with the business community to strengthen the democratic process. For more on that, I'm pleased to welcome up Katie Wannenberg, Principal at Public-Private Strategies and President of the Business for America's Future Fund, where she works with governments and businesses across the country, from the White House to Fortune 500 companies to Main Street. And before we start, you'll notice that Katie is on your program as part of our breakout sessions today. Unfortunately, her session co-leader, Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, is under the weather and not able to be with us, so you should be getting information as you came in, but just note that instead we will have a breakout session on public safety at that same time today. So with that, Katie, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks everyone, and I know, we just had a great conversation about the important role that many of our elected officials are playing in protecting the democratic process. And one of the things that we were going to talk about in our roundtable today was the important role that business should be playing in that. So just to back up a little bit, in 2020, my business partner and co-founder in public-private strategies, Rhett Buttle, was on the Biden campaign, and really around August started to see this need and desire to engage with the business community about what we were anticipating could happen once we were getting closer and closer to November, which was this delegitimization of the outcome of the election. And so we started to work behind the scenes to engage with business leaders and business owners across the country to really impress upon them, and I think for really the first time for them to make the deep connection that, you know, their business, their stability, their ability to hire, to run their businesses was deeply rooted in this idea of a strong democracy. And so out of 2020, I know it was a very challenging period of time for many of us, for those of us who unfortunately lived in Washington, D.C. to see the events of January 6th, to get to January 20th. And then as we've looked at the next 4 years, and you know, as we stand here in Arizona, you know, I'm so impressed with the caliber and I think the consistency we've seen from those elected officials who have been protecting democracy. So my message to you all, many of you who are elected officials, many of you who are supporting elected officials, is how important it is that you bring that message to the business community in your states and your localities. And I do want to just also maybe make a connection. Mayor Gallego was talking this morning about this incredible investment that is happening in Arizona. You know, you have not only the Taiwan manufacturing plant coming, the chip manufacturer, but she said 23 companies are making investments here in Arizona. That 24 companies, I think the Secretary of State told me last night that something like 40,000 new jobs in Arizona. So the connection I'm making for you is, for those 40,000 new jobs, you need important things like infrastructure, you need stabilization of cost, you need goods, you need innovation. And what does that require? That requires a strong democracy. That we know that business owners over and over say, we need to have stability, we need to have common sense, we need to make sure that everything we are doing is to allow our communities to thrive. In some polling that I'm happy to share with all of you that we just recently did, 80% of business leaders, this was a Gallup Morning Consult poll, said businesses should act to protect democratic institutions. And then on top of that, 86% of small business owners believe democracy and capitalism are linked. And so we know that the business case is there, we know the democracy case is there, and we are working hard to merge those two together. So I just want to thank the New Deal team who had to fly by the seat of their pants on an adjustment on the schedule. I want to thank you all. But I just want to say I'm not sugarcoating the challenges that we all face as voters, as those who are protecting the voting process. But as many of you in this room who have taken an oath to serve your communities, I really encourage you over the next days, weeks, and months to take this responsibility to the business leaders in your community and impress upon them the very important role that they play in ensuring that not just in 2024, but in future years, these attacks on our democracy, those attacks that delegitimize our democracy, are met with a wall of just strong, forceful messages that say our democracy is intact, it is important for us to move forward, and it is important for our communities to thrive. So thank you very much for creating this space for me today. Again, we have tons of polling. Some of it is actually broken down by key states. So please come find me, and I'm happy to share my card and share that information with you going forward. So thank you.
Okay, Katie, thank you so much. We pivot now to another one of the biggest areas of our focus over the past couple of years, which is maximizing the impact of Biden-era investments on your communities. To lead that conversation and introduce our next segment, I'm thrilled to welcome a New Deal alum, an innovative former mayor and county supervisor from Santa Cruz, California, and most importantly, the founder and co-host of our podcast and honorable profession, Ryan Coonerty. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey. Thank you. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I am going to make a shameless plug that an honorable profession is really growing leaps and bounds. We're hearing from folks in the White House who are using it to track what's going on in the states and localities. Most importantly, we're hearing from regular people who are using it as inspiration to run for office or help candidates run for office. So please make sure you're following it, spreading the word, coming on as a guest if we haven't had you on already, or if you want to come back. It's a great opportunity. It is my pleasure now to introduce you to, I think, one of the most dynamic mayors in the country, Mayor Justin Bibb. He's the 58th mayor of Cleveland. He is following the Daniel Burnham quote to make no small plans. He is using federal dollars in a bunch of different sectors, and we're really excited to hear about those efforts today, and we're proud to have him as part of the New Deal and joining us here today. So, Mayor Bibb.
Yes.
Let's talk about a few of those plans.
Yeah.
Can you outline 2 or 3 that you're most excited about?
Well, first, I wanted to thank Mayor Gallego for the invitation to our great city. It's been a lot of good sunshine in Phoenix, so let's give her a round of applause if we can. She's also my colleague as one of the vice chairs of Climate Mayors, as well as Lauren McLean, who's here as well, too. So we got a lot of good mayors in the New Deal Club. When I took office, Cleveland was ranked the poorest big city in the country. Nearly half of our children were living in poverty. And we were also ranked the worst city in the country for black women. But we are using those challenges to make some bold, big investments in our city because of the great work that the Biden-Harris administration has done in investing in cities like Cleveland, Ohio. We received the 8th largest allocation of American Rescue Plan funds from the ARPA investments, over $512 million. And we wanted to make sure that those investments had these 3 criteria. Number 1, can we leverage these investments over time, right? Secondly, equity, equity, equity. Everything we do as mayors must be rooted in racial equity and centering our public policies and the lived experiences of our residents. And thirdly, we wanted to ensure that these investments would have a long-term transformational impact on our city. So one of the big things I'm excited about is our largest allocation of ARPA funding created a new $50 million Sites Fund for Good Jobs. So what are we doing? We are taking 1,000 acres of brownfield vacant land in our city, that's predominantly located in black and brown neighborhoods in Cleveland and turning those 1,000 acres of brownfield vacant lots into shovel-ready greenfield sites. And why is that important? Well, Cleveland was once a walk-to-work city. Whether you walk to the old steel mill or the old manufacturing base. And over the last 2 decades, we have lost nearly 20% of our population and have lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. And already, this new investment is projected to create up to 65,000 new indirect and direct jobs in the urban core of our city. The other thing we're excited about is the work we're doing to address and eradicate lead paint in our community. No child should ever be poisoned by lead paint in this country, and Cleveland has one of the biggest challenges in the nation when it comes to lead paint. And so we use $17 million of ARPA funds to create a fully funded endowment to work with the nonprofit community to ensure we can eradicate every home in our city around the lead paint crisis. And so those are the two of the biggest investments we've made around ARPA that I'm really excited about.
One of the things I was interested in is you came from a background in education and technology. How are you going to leverage the massive changes we're looking at in technology to bring benefits to your city?
Well, when I ran for mayor in 2021 as a first-time candidate for public office, when I was knocking on doors, trying to get my name on the ballot, the biggest thing voters told me was they wanted a modern and responsive city hall. And when I got to the mayor's office, it took me almost 2 days to get my email account set up. That's how far behind we were when I took office in January of 2022. And in just 2 years, we've done a couple things to really change that. One, we have now created the first new city website we've had in nearly 2 decades in Cleveland. We can clap for that. That's a big deal. We've also will be launching a brand new 311 call center action hotline later this year, because I made a commitment and a vow to my residents that they should be able to track a complaint like they track a FedEx or an Amazon package. And just 2 weeks ago, we joined 85 other cities across the country to finally have an open data portal as well too, because many of my lawyers in my law department are spending many hours on public records requests, on various data requests, and not getting contracts done, doing the people's work. So all those investments go a long way to make us a more modern and responsive city government for the 21st century.
As you mentioned, you made these big investments and big bets with ARPA funds. We all know that those funds, unfortunately, are likely to be one-time funds. So how do you think about continuing to invest in this change and invest in communities going forward?
Yeah, well, beyond just the ARPA funds, you know, from the Inflation Reduction Act to the CHIPS bill to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, all of those federal investments are giving cities like Cleveland and Boise and Phoenix and Detroit and Pittsburgh a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really center income equality, closing the racial wealth gap, and creating new opportunities for economic opportunity. And so we've really been focused on engaging our foundations and the private sector to compete for more than our fair share from the federal government. The other thing I would also say is it's so important that we also prioritize state support as well. Right now, we are trying to become a two-waterfront city in Cleveland because we sit on 20% of the world's fresh water in Lake Erie. We also sit on the banks of the Gallego River, which over 50 years ago caught on fire and is now a leading example of what clean waterways should look like in the country. And so we've been working with our federal delegation, with leaders in the Biden-Harris administration, with the governor and members of the legislature to make a once-in-a-generation investment in all waterfronts. And I believe it's that kind of public, and private sector partnership we need to maximize these federal and state investments as well, too.
Talk about your interest in resilience, both through the climate mayors, but also through these Clean Water Acts, cleaning brownfields. How do you think about resilience and climate for your city?
Well, when I ran for mayor in 2021, I had no idea I would become a climate mayor. And I say that because for a lot of folks in the climate change space, we've done, I think, a disservice in many ways to our residents by not grounding this conversation about addressing climate change in ways that everyday people understand. And one of the things I quickly uncovered was talking to a resident in the east side of Cleveland when I was knocking on doors. She talked about the fact that her son had asthma, and it was in a part of the city that had one of the lowest tree canopies in our community, which affected the air quality. And 2 zip codes down the block, they had some of the best rates of air quality and low asthma. That's when the connection was made for me. And so when I talk about resilience, when I talk about climate and environmental justice, you know, we as mayors and as elected officials need to ground that conversation in safe communities, healthy communities, good jobs. I think about at least, violence as an issue of climate and environmental justice, because if you're living in a heat island with no tree canopy, or you live in a part of your community where it's not a good park to go to relieve stress or to meditate or to pick up basketball, then that's an environmental justice issue and has a direct impact on violence in most cities. And so all these things are interconnected, and we as mayors and elected officials must do a better job of communicating that resilience in ways that everyday people can understand.
I'm curious, you came as an outsider. I think I saw something, you had like 2% name recognition.
Less than that.
Less than 2%. There's only a couple numbers below that. Exactly. Can you talk about what surprised you about the job, about local government politics?
Yeah. I think the biggest surprise for me has been, as a mayor, how many issues come across your desk, whether it's losing another member of our city to gun violence, or trying to find a way to get a deal done to create new development in a historically underserved neighborhood, to now having to really serve as a champion for a woman's right to choose when Ohio tried to undermine our ability to protect choice. All these things are now on the front desk of mayors in a way they weren't pre-pandemic. And so I think the role of the mayor has changed in a way that most of us probably didn't anticipate. But I think being a mayor of a city is one of the most important positions right now in the country, given so much gridlock and lack of trust we see in what's happening in Washington, D.C. We are quickly becoming a nation of city-states where mayors are leading the way on innovation. And as I've said before in many forums across the country, mayors are on the front lines to every issue we're facing in America, but we're also closest to the solution as well, too. And I think it's that innovation our country needs now more than ever.
As you mentioned, your state has become increasingly reactionary and red. There was a time when we all grew up and we all just waited for how Ohio voted and how they voted to elected the president. What's your relationship with the state? What are you seeing on the ground as we go into 2024? And what do you see for the future of Ohio?
Well, I'll never forget one of my first meetings with the legislature when I was talking to a Republican member of the legislature in Ohio. And he said to me, Mayor Bibb, if you ran your city like we run our rural townships, you'd be a lot better off. So in Ohio, it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's an urban versus rural divide. And I have to spend a lot of my time as a mayor educating and exposing extreme right-wing MAGA Republicans who've really undermined, I think, Ohio's potential. But in my heart of hearts, I still think Ohio is a purple state. I really do. President Obama won it twice. We're working very hard to re-elect Senator Sherrod Brown, who's a Cleveland resident, by the way. And I think we have a unique opportunity in Ohio to really show what can happen when Democrats and Republicans work together. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, in my first year in office, I tried to expunge low-level marijuana convictions for Cleveland residents. And the reason why I tried to do this is because so many of my friends I grew up with had these low-level convictions on their records, and because they couldn't get them expunged, they couldn't get a home loan, couldn't get a small business loan, couldn't qualify for financial aid. And the courts tried to block us. But then I got a phone call from a Republican state senator, Nathan Manning. I knew his wife because she was my spin class instructor. And he said, Mayor Bibb, I love what you're trying to do to advance criminal justice in Cleveland. How about I add this in a statewide bill to give cities and counties the authority to expunge low-level marijuana convictions? Luckily, it passed the legislature, and Governor DeWine signed the bill. So it's one of many other examples where we have Democratic mayors finding common ground with Republicans in their legislatures and in governors' mansions. And I think we as mayors have to elevate that work now more than ever to really address all the social division and lack of common sense bipartisan governing we're seeing across the country.
Finally, I want to ask you something, because I know you're getting pulled in a million different directions, locally, nationally. For all the leaders in the room who are in the same boat, how do you think about how you prioritize your limited time, your limited energy? How do you find time for that spin class that then pays dividends and statewide policy? How do you prioritize and get results?
Well, I learned very early in my first 6 months that you can't wing something like that. You got to have a structure around it. Because, I was in a hurry to get everything done in my first year in office. I mean, I ran on the campaign slogan, Cleveland can't wait, because I just knew how boldly we needed to change our city. But in my first year, my chief of staff sat me down and said, Mayor, once you're long dead and gone, I'm like, way to be morbid, man. It's kind of tough. What do you want to be remembered for? What are going to be your gravestone priorities? And we had about 10 priorities on the whiteboard, and we narrowed them down to 3. So the first is working to make Cleveland one of the safest big cities in America. The second is restoring the black middle class in Cleveland's southeast side. And the last one was finally making Cleveland a 2 waterfront city that can be globally competitive. And so every day when I go to City Hall, there's more than 3 people in my cabinet all working to execute those 3 gravestone priorities. And obviously, crises come up, but every day someone's working on executing those 3 big things, and that's been my North Star since we took office 2 years ago.
Well, I know I speak for all of us when I say we can't wait to see the results. We're so glad to have you in the New Deal, and we need to get you on the podcast. But thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing your vision.
Thank you, and thank you. And for any basketball fans, open invitation to see the Cavs playoffs. Just let me know. Thanks so much. The Cleveland Old Fashioned.
Okay, thank you, Ryan and Mayor Bibb, for that inspiring conversation. We pivot now to the next stage of our program, and it's clear that creating high-quality educational opportunities is a fundamental part of a freedom agenda, as Debbie was talking about earlier. In that poll that she discussed early this morning, 81% of respondents said that supporting freedom means government should increase access to education. But what policies are needed to deal with the challenging moment for our schools, a moment when so many students have not recovered from falling behind during the pandemic, when an education beyond high school is more important than ever, and when we are dealing with difficult politics around education issues. The NewDEAL Forum is pleased to partner with Education Reform Now, a sister organization of Democrats for Education Reform, to explore these questions over the next couple of days in our next panel and in a breakout session tomorrow on education messaging. It is my pleasure to kick off that programming by introducing the CEO of Democrats for Education Reform, a longtime New Dealer and a leader in policy in this space as the former mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, Jorge Elorza. Mayor, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to say before I jump into the presentation, I want to share how excited I am to be here today. I still remember the first time I came to a New Deal gathering for the very first time. And I remember just reaching out and meeting so many of the other elected officials that gathered throughout the country. And I truly felt as though I was with my tribe. And so this is an organization that I always valued when I was in elected office. And I want to just thank Debbie and her team, along with Helen Milby, one of the co-founders of the organization, for this partnership that we have at the moment, and certainly one that we want to grow in the years to come. It really, really is great being here. So, relating to the work that we do in education, part of the reason why I've always loved this organization so much, you and I are around elected officials on a constant basis. And I think it's fair to say that, I found that in terms of elected officials, there are folks that have long and quote-unquote successful careers, but probably don't get much of anything done in those long careers. And then there are elected officials, as Mayor Bibb was sort of just channeling, that on the second day on the job, you feel as though you're running out of time. You have a purpose. You're in these positions because you're out to get stuff done. That is what I believe comes to signify at New Deal. So we're excited to share with you a little bit about our organization and explore how we can work together in the months and years to come. So a little bit of what we're going to go through. I want to just give you a sense of the current education landscape, introduce you to our organization, and talk about what lies ahead. So first things first, there is an education crisis. And I want to focus on the policy side of that education crisis. There's a crisis because we have to match where we are to our why. Why are we here and why do we do what we do? The reality is that when education is done right, it's the great equalizer in society. When it's not done right, it's probably the greatest source of inequality in our society. And the truth is that in so many places, it's not being done right. I'll give you one stat. I'll talk about my city, the city of Providence. Can you believe that in the city of Providence, at traditional high schools, only 2.4% of high school seniors are doing math at grade level? 2.4%. And we can debate the merits of standardized testing, et cetera, but I think we can all agree that 2.5% is simply unacceptable. It's indefensible. And as we scan throughout the country, Providence isn't the only one, and Providence is probably not even the worst. It really is a crisis across the map. We're literally leaving kids and communities behind. Now, just one point on this. This is not to demean or denigrate all of the amazing work that practitioners, teachers, administrators are doing on the ground every day. And the truth is that if we didn't have their public service, things might be even worse. So we deeply value the professionals that are showing up and doing the work every single day. But numbers don't lie. We can and we must do better. Second, I also wanted to share with you that we have an education crisis in terms of politics. So this is with the Team Blue hat on at the moment. You'll notice that, so the blue line is on top, the red line is on the bottom. Absent for 2015, you'll notice that in terms of voters' minds, Democrats have always held an advantage in voter trust on the issue of education. However, in the polls that we're doing now, you can see that that gap has steadily narrowed, and in fact, you see it widen right at the end. But that's actually, we're going to unpack that just a little bit. You'll see that that's not cause for celebration at the moment. In effect, what we're seeing is that the party that has always been seen as the party of education, at least in voters' minds, is no longer the party of education. Now, why have Republicans closed the gap on Democrats? First of all, on the Democratic side, the reality is that since about 2015, education policy, K through 12 policy, has frankly not been at the top of the agenda for our party. Now, I know that most education work is local, but the reality is also that when there is that national leadership, it makes a big difference. It sets the agenda, and it provides political cover whenever it's necessary. So we haven't had that national agenda around education. The second piece of why Republicans have closed the gap is that, frankly, it all started with the Glenn Youngkin election in Virginia, and then it was supercharged during COVID. So parents' rights, parent choice, etc. And, frankly, Republicans have stumbled onto something that is resonating with voters. And since the end of COVID, they've offered a broad vision based on private school choice that, as I mentioned, is resonating with voters at the moment. In the past couple of years, about 11 or 12 states have passed comprehensive ESA and voucher laws. The Koch brothers recently announced that by 2030, their goal is to have half of America with universal private school choice laws within their reach. And so they're on a tear. And throughout this time, over the last 3 years, there has been no Democratic alternative that has been offered or embraced. Now, this is not to say that some Democrats are not leading on education. There are several examples. Governor Polis, Governor Shapiro, who's a New Deal leader, Governor Moore, and many others in our states. But the reality is that that leadership is being dwarfed by what we're seeing on the other side. So I want to share with you some information from our latest poll. And frankly, this isn't even public anymore. It should be released later this week. So I mentioned that in the 2024 graph, there was a gap that Democrats were opening over Republicans. Well, we've unpacked that a little bit more. And it turns out that Democrats still hold an advantage over Republicans in terms of caring about education. But we don't hold an advantage. In fact, it's a 1-point advantage over Republicans when voters ask, who do you trust to deliver on education? So we're seen as caring, but we're not seen as delivering. And this is in spite of the fact that the Biden administration has made historic investments in education. When I served as mayor, I certainly appreciated those investments. And certainly those investments, they helped me a great deal, et cetera. But what I can say with certainty is that it's not registering with voters. And then the last piece is, in terms of education, we are not tying our education vision to the issues that motivate people politically and motivate people to vote. When we ask folks, we all know that many folks vote on the economy. We ask them, what are the issues that most relate to whether you believe your children will have it better off than you? Number one answer currently is inflation. Number two answer is education. So there's a tight link to be made there. So I want to introduce our organization very, very briefly. I'm going to ask everyone who's here representing DFER to please stand for a quick moment. We have several folks throughout the room. All right. Now that I've embarrassed them, thank you very much. We're going to be here throughout the day. Many folks will be here tomorrow. Please have a conversation, reach out to us. We want to build relationships and figure out how we can be supportive of the work that you're doing. So we live at the intersection of education policy and politics. Our superpower is in our structure and that of our partner organizations. We do C3 nonprofit work. Our partner organizations do C4 work. We get involved politically. We do independent expenditures on races that we really care about. We're bundlers. We have PACs throughout the country, et cetera. We have 7 chapter states. We also have an office in DC. We do a lot of outreach to the administration, both on the official and the unofficial side. And we, as an organization historically, have a track record of results. We do and move education policy through politics. Our model is really straightforward, and it's very similar to the New Deal. It's ideas plus champions equals impact. We believe that the right ideas with the right champions leads to real impact. Our policy pillars, what we stand for, look, we believe in whatever works. We believe in innovation, so we know what works. We believe in accountability, so we're only investing in what works. And we believe in public school choice so that families can decide for themselves what works. We pass legislation. We curate best practices. Our role is to accelerate the pace of replication. And we do strategic communication. We do a lot of polling. We provide messaging support as well. On the champion side, what we do is we build relationships with elected officials, and we support them with all the tools in our toolkit. That's on the policy side and also on the politics side. We do federal work, and we do state work as well. So before I finish, there is one communications piece that I really want to emphasize, and I look forward to speaking more about it during the panel. As a party, we must reframe and reset our relationship with choice. The reality is that choice resonates with voters, right? Choice resonates because of course it does. And in this debate, just as in virtually every public policy debate, we don't want to be on the side of limiting choice. Now, historically, choice in the education conversation has been virtually synonymous with charters. And as you know, the politics around charters has been very, very challenging within our party. And as an organization, we are not interested in having the same intra-party fight that we've been having for the last 15 to 20 years. The reality is that after all of the progress, and we do believe in charters, public charter schools, but after all of the work and all of the progress, only about 7% of kids in America study at charter schools. And so for public education, we have to do work beyond simply the charter school space. And what we strongly suggest is a broad menu of public school options. And there's a lot to it. There's public charter schools, there's neighborhood schools. There's a question of inter-district choice, intra-district choice, universal enrollment. There's magnet schools, career academies, dual academy, Montessori schools. There is a lot to unpack and mine within the public school space. But we as a party in the education debate need to have our form of choice that aligns with democratic values. And this is an opportunity for us. In all of our polling, when we match or when we test private school choice versus public school choice wins 2-1 every single time. And what it has the capacity to do is also put us and other important stakeholder groups, such as teachers' unions, we're on the same side. We are protectors of the public education system. So just a couple next steps. If you are leading boldly, or you want to lead boldly on education, we want to help you. And we can tailor our support to whatever your needs are. Sometimes it means being on the front lines, sometimes it means being entirely in the background. But a core part of our mission is to build relationships with elected leaders, such as yourselves. And I want to invite you to be part of our community. We're going to be hosting two convenings. One of them is going to be hosted this fall, and we're going to focus specifically on the southeast of the United States. We have a big national convening that's planned for February of 2025, which will be a call to action for our party around education. So again, it is an absolute pleasure to be part of this group. I look forward to meeting all of you, and I look forward to a robust conversation in the panel that is to come. Thank you. Am I supposed to? All right. I'm going to invite all the panelists to please join me here on stage. I'm going to first ask my very, very good friend, former mayor of Parkland, Florida, and now a representative from Florida, Christine Hunschofsky. I'm also going to ask Massachusetts State Senator Pavel Payano to also join us here on stage. And I also want to introduce you to a former elected official who is now the president for the Southeast region for our organization. Her name is Alicia Thomas-Searcy, who will be moderating the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Ooh, how many of you are from the South? Let me see. So you understand that I'm about to do that again, right? Because we like a little call and response in the South. So let me wake you up. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
There we go. Thank you for this opportunity to be here. Nothing gets me more excited than talking about kids and education. Raise your hand if education is your jam. Let me see who our people are. Okay, good. And so for the rest of you, perhaps economic development, economic empowerment, is that your jam? You raise your hand. Okay. The rest of you, you have kids and care about education, the future of our country? Yay. All right. Great. All right. So we've got a very important conversation this afternoon, and I want to introduce very briefly our other two panelists, and we'll, of course, be joined by our former mayor as well. I'm not going to read their entire bios. They are in the program. Check them out, because this conversation is important, and I need all the time we can have to get into it. So first, we have Senator Payano from Massachusetts, the son of immigrant Laurentians, is that how you say that? Who dedicated decades to the LPS system. Massachusetts Senator Pavel Payano learned from a very young age the importance of hard work and the value of a quality education. Prior to his election to the state senate, the senator served the city of Lawrence for over a decade, first as a school committee member and most recently as a city councilor at large. He has experience working as a social worker for the Department of Transitional Assistance and as a professor at Merrimack College. Welcome, Senator. Welcome, Senator. Thank you. All right. And then we have Representative Christine Hunschofsky. Did I say it right? All right. She's my homegirl from Florida. I'm originally from Florida. She was elected to the City of Parkland Commission in 2013 and elected mayor in 2016. She led her city through the aftermath of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in Parkland in 2018. Y'all remember that? Very difficult time. Additionally, the representative worked with the Broward County School Board and local developers to build additional elementary school space and promoted a buy local program to help small businesses. Christine was also elected to the Florida House of Representatives as a state representative for District 96 in November of 2020. Let's welcome Representative Christine. And then finally, you heard from Jorge. I'm just going to read a couple of things. As you know, he's a CEO of Education Reform Now, but before that served 2 terms as mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, where he undertook bold action towards a social and racial justice agenda. This included taking the unprecedented step to engage the State Department of Education to turn around the city's chronically underperforming school system, creating the city's Eat, Play, Learn initiative to expand out-of-school enrichment, and launching a nationally recognized African American ambassador group to bring Black leaders into the center of policy making. And so again, we welcome the 3 of you. We are happy to have you, and want to jump right in. Jorge, you gave us some sobering, I would say, data on where we are as a country, particularly as Democrats, and how we've kind of lost footing. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that we do in this session is inspire and talk about ideas and best practices. As a former elected official, I understand what it means to take your time to come to a conference. You're interested in these issues, and you want to leave with some good ideas, some things you can get back on the plane and start talking to your team about. And so that's what the three of you will be tasked to do this afternoon as we talk about some of the most pressing issues in education. It is also my hope that we will all leave here with a real education agenda, if you didn't have one already. And so the first topic that I want to talk about, first let me ask this of the other two panelists. What do you make of this data that Democrats in particular have lost footing when it comes to how the country feels about our leadership in education? They understand that we care about education. People know that Democrats care, period. That's who we are. But we're not leading in terms of implementation, in terms of delivering on behalf of kids. What do you make of that in your own experiences in your legislature, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think we do lead in education. I think some of it becomes how we talk about it today can't be how we used to talk about it. So we talk about how we support our public school teachers and making sure that we have teachers and how can we best support them. And it's not because we just care about teachers. It's because the student experience is far better when they have qualified, engaged, and supported teachers in the classroom. I think what Republicans have done well is talk about choice. From Florida, I would say the choice is only available to certain people who can afford to get their kids to the choice. And I think what we miss is talking about the families and the students. I've had discussions, some of them you've heard here, some of them we've had privately. People want to know, that's great that you're doing all these things and you stand for all these things, but how are what you doing, how will that affect my family? How will that affect my kids' opportunities in the future to have good jobs where they can afford to at least live as well as we're living now? And so when we talk about our traditional public schools and when we talk about the lifelines in our communities, we have to talk about it in a way that we're saying the end goal is for the families to have local choices so that their kids will have the best opportunities going forward in life. And that when we're supporting teachers and schools, it's not because we're supporting buildings and unions, which we are, but it's because we know that that will have the best impact on the kids and will give them the best chance to succeed in the future. Because in the end, that's what we all want.
Amen.
So I think as I heard that data, one of the things that I thought is like, wow, I'm really privileged to be in Massachusetts. In Mass, I think Democrats are leading in a lot of this. You know, we just passed landmark bill on access to early education and childcare. We're leading when it comes to making higher education more affordable or free for individuals. And when it comes to K-12 in 2010, and this is right about when I got started, 2010, 2011, we passed an education reform bill that allows the state to come in and take over schools that are underperforming. And because at the end of the day, what we want is good schools and a good education for our youth. And we just passed a few years ago the Student Opportunity Act that basically increases funding for urban school districts to try to match up what some of the wealthier communities are getting. And every year they're getting a little bit more to hopefully try to meet that gap. So in many ways we're doing that, and I think that you know, at the end of the day, sometimes I engage in conversations with some of my Democratic colleagues where they talk to me you know, about their feelings around charter schools, their feelings around standardized schools, and how in their school that they grew up, they just had this great education, And, there was no need for any of this. And what I say to them is, wow, I'm extremely jealous that that was your experience, but that wasn't my experience, and it's not the experience of the kids that I represent. And I say that being a former teacher, having a mom that served 30 years as a teacher and a dad that had 26 years as a teacher. There's a lot more that can be done, and I think that it is important that us as Democrats take on that fight, even if at times we have to look at the person next to us and say we disagree, because at the end of the day, the importance is that our youth, our kids, have access to all the opportunities possible so they're able to get a good career and reach that American dream.
Thank you for that. Jorge, I want you to jump in on this too, and then I'm going to focus on these particular policy issues that we want to get out there. But you've been in this role now for a year, and so you've had a chance to go around the country, talk to elected officials. What do you think needs to happen, or what are you telling sitting legislators and other elected officials about how we regain this trust from voters when it comes to education?
So two things come to mind. The first is the framing around choice. We can't be on the side of limiting choice. I would say in basically any debate, and it relates to this debate as well. And I shared my thoughts about it there. And then on the policy front, education is so complicated. It's so big, and it's so dynamic. There is no one answer. There's no one set of answers that is the solution. So I don't think any one of us have that answer. But I do have some thoughts on a process to get there. And our focus is to create a national community of elected ed reform champions that we support in any way that would help them be more successful in their advocacy. And I believe that by building up the language, the ideas, the policies, and the vision collectively, together, state by state, that the best ideas, and by best I mean both impactful but also politically viable, they rise to the top. And as an organization, we want to accelerate the pace of replication of those best ideas. And essentially, we want to be an incubator of those. I don't think there's any one person that can say, these are XYZ, the steps that are required. But we do need to put more energy as a party into this debate because, let's talk about what is at stake. People, kids, communities are being left behind, and we're all in this because we want to make a difference in the world. And I can tell you that education kind of matters, right? And if we want to transform communities, I would argue that it begins with education, and as a party, we need to put the issue back on the front burner.
Agreed. Go ahead.
If I could just add, so in Broward County, one of the things that's been very popular in choice is our traditional public schools have these magnet programs now that have been incredibly popular, where students who are more into technology have an option to go to schools that are more technology driven, those who are more business driven. And it's really about thinking about what the kids need, whether they need special help in the classrooms, whether they have certain interests that will put them on the path. We have the IB programs, the Cambridge programs that are coming into the schools. There are so many ways to do choice. And then there are also, we have kids who won't go to college. And we've been working with Junior Achievement in our area to work on pre-apprenticeship programs. So students are graduating high school with certifications, and the employers are already at their certification at the Junior Achievement pre-apprenticeship program graduation. They have a job lined up at graduation that's an excellent job, an incredibly well-paid job. So these are not low-paid, low-skill jobs, quite the contrary. And it's about giving all kids opportunities for whatever their skills are and whatever their interests are. And that's where we can make such a big difference. Education, it's like you got to learn this, and it goes back. I mean, I don't know when it all started with the programs that we have today, but we have to become more innovative, and we have to be willing to have those discussions. But we also have to be willing to support the resources that we need in order to make that happen, and that includes our teachers. That includes making sure that we have enough teachers. We have such a shortage in Florida now, and we have some of the worst pay, and that is not helpful to a quality education. I look back fondly. I had public school choice when I went to Boston Latin School, and I remember teachers who saw things in me and believed in me when I didn't believe in me. So it's so important to not leave quality teachers out of this discussion, because we can't have quality education without the quality teachers.
Christine, I appreciate that. You literally covered every single issue that we're going to talk about, so thank you.
You're welcome.
So I want to jump in and talk about pathways for a second, and I want to come to you, Senator. We're in an interesting time in this country, right? We're talking about whether or not the education that we offer students right now is meaningful. When I think about what education looks like, and as you mentioned, when it started in the 1800s, if you were to walk into a classroom today, there's not a lot that looks different, right? And so one of the things that I say is that we've got to stop offering this telegram education to a TikTok generation, right? We've got to completely shift what education looks like. Y'all like that one? Yeah. If you quote it, just give me a little bit of credit for it, okay? And then on top of what education, the meaningfulness of education, right? There's a question around that. On top of that, we've got questions around the affordability of college, right? And should students go to college? And I think we've had all kinds of iterations of the relevance of college over the last probably 5 to 10 years. And so when we think about career education and pathways, there are a number of states, Georgia is one of them, where we're offering pathway educational programs in high school. So dual enrollment, right? You get college credit while you're in high school. You're able to choose a career path, right, as early as middle school if kids know what they want to do. And so can you all talk about, all three of you, I'm going to start with you, Senator, how you think career pathways ought to look in schools today, what best practices you have seen, whether it's in your states or others, from a policy standpoint. So if I'm a legislator, if I'm a mayor in this audience, and I want to know what I can do to make our education system more meaningful, I can provide these kinds of opportunities for students. What do I need to do in order to get there?
Great question. So I'll start off with when I first got on the school board, our school board, I was about 23 years old. And I remember thinking, these folks, what am I doing here? I haven't finished my master's degree. And the first question that came up in my first meeting was the purpose of Lawrence High School, which was at the time, the public high school in the city, is to have the kids speak English. Now, I want to say my city is about 90% Latino. A lot of immigrants, I think 70% of the households are limited English. So it's to teach them English so they can work at McDonald's. Now, insane, right? So that was my first moment of leadership where I explained what the purpose of a public school system was, and it told me that I needed to be more involved and present ideas. And I remember that first year, 23, I presented this idea of a program where we can take 10 to 20 kids, have them go to college, and have them, the classes that they take in college count for the high school diploma so they can get out with a year's worth of college. And I was laughed at by all those administrators. Fast forward, our school actually went into receivership, and I actually was in favor of that because it helped transform.
What does receivership mean in case people don't know?
So receivership basically means that the state comes in and they hire a superintendent and give them the power of the school board. So they make a lot of the decisions almost unilaterally without the school board. But having someone there with those powers, that extra money and vision, he was able to take this idea and say, no, we're not going to do it for 10 kids. We're going to do it for 300 kids. So now there are close to more than 300 students that go to our community college and our private college, and they're taking credits, coming out with a year's worth of college, sometimes a year and a half, and they're pushing for 2 years so they can come out with an associate's. Right now, a public college, UMass Lowell, costs around $32,000, $34,000 a year. BU is $60,000 to $70,000. So this is saving families a lot of money. We are also doing we started an After Dark program where we take the students that are interested in vocational training at our public schools but weren't able to get into vocational school. Now they get out a little bit earlier so they can take some classes and learn. We are also working on this program. I'm very excited. So my first year, when I first started, I remember speaking with the Senate president, and I come from a background where I started politics because of social justice issues and because I'm a deep believer that public education should be free for everyone. Now, I go into my first meeting, and I'm like, man, I don't want to sound like a radical here. So let me just, bring it down a little bit, and I say, Madam President, I'm a deep believer that we must ensure that public education is affordable and accessible for all people. And she says, yeah, but you know something? I think community college should be free for everyone. I'm like, yes, thank God. And sure enough, we've put money into that. We launched what's called Mass Reconnect, where if you're 25 or older, you're able to come back, and community college is for free. And now what the folks in the higher ed space have said is that a lot of the people that are coming in were able to get in using financial aid without using the state funding. They just didn't know they could. So it's been able to bring in a lot of people that didn't think that education was for them. And that in itself, I believe, is transforming lives. And we are pushing a lot to what former Mayor and Rep talked about, apprenticeship programs, and ensuring that the trades are seen as a viable opportunity, not just for our youth, but for our young adults as well.
Thank you. Representative.
Yeah, so I think I hit on a little bit of it earlier. There's also now a requirement that you have to start in middle school in the public schools of letting the students know and their families know what other business groups or what other pathways are available to them in different areas. I think the earlier you start, the better. Some of the discussions we've actually had, I'm also on our Commission on Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder, and in behavioral health, we're having a workforce issue. I think is also working with the different businesses in the area about having paid internships for a lot of these students, because people don't see a career if they don't see that they can afford to work in that space. So some of the things we're working on, that's more on the university level. We have this amazing Bright Futures program in the state of Florida where if you score a certain amount and you have a certain GPA, your tuition is covered at a state university. And very recently, for those kids who can't afford to have all the volunteer hours because they have to work and they have to make money while they're in high school, we're now counting those work hours toward the volunteer hours that are required. Which is excellent. Yes, thank you to the person snapping. Appreciate it.
Go ahead and applaud. It's okay.
Having said that, you also have to have businesses so that the students will have a place to work. One of the concerns I have in the state of Florida is we're having these kids graduate and then the jobs that they're looking for aren't in our state, whether it's technology, and in different areas where we can really grow. So it's important to have the pathways, it's important to have the access, but it's also important to have those partnerships with the businesses because a lot of, in my opinion, we can do a lot at the state level and we have in many ways, but a lot of it is with your local leaders creating those partnerships and connecting those bridges, building those bridges between your community schools and your local chambers and your businesses so that everybody's kind of working together. We have great career days now at a lot of our schools. We have a lot more participation. with some of our charitable organizations that are helping out in the schools as well in order to help with mentoring children. I think that's really important. Again, I go back to teachers who saw things in me that I didn't see in myself when I was younger. There is nothing like mentorship. There is no replacement for people coming into the schools and telling kids and seeing in kids the potential they have, letting them know that potential they have. Because a lot of what we do in life, it is about what we think is possible. And we're usually going to set our standard and our goal with what we think we can achieve. And imagine if you don't think you can achieve much, but somebody who you respect is from the community comes in and lets you know that they think you can achieve it. So I think there are a lot of things we can do. I think it takes government on all levels. I think government on all levels have different roles to play, but it has to be local, it has to be state, it has to be all the stakeholders coming together, wanting our children to succeed. Because if our children don't succeed, the other option, the opposite of opportunity, is not good for our students, it's not good for our families, and it's not good for our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Speaking of local communities and what local officials can do, Mayor?
So I wanted to build off of Senator Payano's comment. So, Senator, I didn't know that when you were on the school board, you were in support of receivership. And I just want to highlight how remarkable that is. Being in favor of receivership means that you basically give up all say and all control. But my guess is that you did that because the crisis in the schools was to such an extent that you needed some kind of radical transformation to deliver for kids. You know, to everyone who's doing this work throughout the country right now, and I just want to emphasize that the delta between what our kids deserve and what they're getting today in terms of opportunity, it's a vast gap. The delta between what we can be doing and what we're actually doing, there is a vast gap. And you know, frankly, I'm of the strong opinion that we need some radical ideas. You know, nipping at the margins, at the edges, it's just not going to get it done. One of my intellectual idols, James Baldwin, he has this interview where he's talking generally about civil rights, and he makes the point that you asked my mother to wait. You asked my father, my uncles, and my aunts to wait. You asked me to wait. You asked my wife to wait, my cousins to wait. And now you're asking my children to wait? No. And I'm supposed to wait because now you mean it? And somehow this reality that has never existed is somehow going to come apart because you really mean it? No. And I believe that applies to our moment in education right now. When have our public schools delivered for low-income black and brown kids? I mean, there are examples here and there, sites, but in terms of school districts and school systems, when has that ever happened? And so, as an organization, we are very interested in, Senator Payano, Alicia actually makes this point all the time. Alicia is a former elected official. She served and led on education issues in Georgia for 12 years. And the way that she says it is, in this organization, we are trying to create exactly what we wish existed when we were in office. And this is an invitation. If you're looking to lead boldly on education, we want to be helpful with the tools that we have. We have, if I may say, perhaps the best policy shop of any organization in the country, led by Charlie Barone, who's here. Charlie has either drafted or helped to draft every major federal education policy bill for the past 25 years. We have great people in our policy shop. We could be helpful. We have Harrison Farnsworth, who's going to be giving a presentation tomorrow. He runs all of our polling, all of our research, all of our data. If we can help, give you a sense of what voters believe and what they think about different issues in your districts, if we can help with messaging, if we can help with policy, and as I mentioned, we do politics as well. If we can help, we want folks to know that if you're doing right by kids, we got your back. If we can help in any of these ways, we want to be there to help. Because Senator, you were mentioning earlier that you were a young man fresh out of college. You entered this position, and you were getting you had to walk through picket lines. You're getting yelled at, mistreated. It's a lonely place when you're leading and you're doing the right thing. And we just want to let you know that we got your back throughout that process.
Thank you. And what I'll add to that is that it's lonely until people see the outcomes. So I remember that year, my friends who were teachers were the ones that pushed me to run, because I didn't really want to run for school board. And after a while, they were saying, hey, I can't put up pictures of you on Facebook because I'm being attacked by my other colleagues, because they did not like the way that I was moving. I remember I had one really strong conversation with a friend of mine, one of my best friends, that was very heated on his end. And then about 6 years later, he comes up to me. I've forgotten this conversation. And he says, I want to apologize. You were right. I'm like, about what? And then he explained, the conversation is at the moment, I just couldn't see it. Now looking in, I think that was the best step that we could have taken. So sometimes you might not make friends with certain people, but you end up creating a whole lot more allies. And I think the community as a whole ends up seeing that could work.
Thank you for that. We're going to open up for questions. I do have a question about supporting teachers that we're going to get to, but we want to open up and see if there are any questions in the audience. I love it.
Hey, Andrea McClellan, Norfolk City Council. I'm curious if there's any data that reflects community involvement and support in outcomes. And I say that because in Norfolk, in our public schools, we have a hell of a time with volunteers who want to help and the school system allowing them to help. And I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that, but I think we have so much talent in our communities, retirees, et cetera, who can provide the mentorship, who could provide all sorts of internships, et cetera. And there needs to be a connection. And I don't know if that's state legislation. I don't know if it's local. I don't know if there's data available, but it's an area, that public engagement piece, that really, really grinds me. So I was just curious your perspective on that.
So what I would say, I think on the local level, there's if you have good leadership within your schools, they can find creative ways. I think the idea of gathering a lot of volunteers in one place, which is the bureaucracy of managing all that. So it becomes, because it looks like it's added work, you tend to stay away from that. But if you can get a nonprofit to say, hey, I will take ownership of whatever the volunteer piece is, then the school is more likely to accept it. So for example, we had, right after COVID, there were a lot of issues going on with kids not getting along with each other. The 7th and 8th grade, they missed, you stepped on my sneaker. How do you engage in a conversation? That to us might be like, what? But to them, they didn't go through middle school. They were absent from these sort of, there were some youth that just stayed at home and weren't able to really connect with their friends. So we had a lot of those issues, a lot of violence, and there were a lot of parents that wanted to get involved. The school didn't necessarily want random people in that area, so they partnered up with an organization, and for a period about 9 months, they would always have volunteers, parents basically, standing in different places when school was getting out and when school was coming in. So that might be an idea that you might want to take.
If I could just add on to that too, when I went to school, I'm 54, just for everybody, so I'm going to say it. There wasn't as much expected of the schools in some ways like there is today. Schools are supposed to be your medical. You're supposed to be able to get medical treatment there. You're supposed to be able to get mental health treatment there. You're supposed to be getting all your meals there. They're supposed to help as like the social bridge, because that's the one place where you can kind of where the students are and you have the most access to the families in that sense. So I do think a lot of partnership with your local charitable groups and different agencies is very helpful, because I think there is in many ways more of a burden on schools today than there, and more requirements to provide various services than there was in the past.
Thank you for that. Any other questions in the audience at the moment? So I want to talk about teachers for a moment. Oh, here's one. Yes.
Yes, hi, Michael Lexton. I have a question, Jorge, for you, specifically relative to messaging. You had mentioned the multiple choices of public school choice and how, you know, it's a wide variety of things. And I feel that on the other side of the House, you have the Koch brothers and Jeff Yass giving millions of dollars to Republicans because they have one message, and that's, you know, charter schools and ESAs, and we need to have more of that. And that's a very clear, distinct message that a lot of people buy into. And so what is the Democrat message that has to go out relative to choice?
Thank you for the question. So, you know, as I mentioned, the Republican message is a very clear one. It's private school choice. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, the Republican message was charter schools, but they've moved further to the right. And I don't want to say they've abandoned charter schools, but the focus has been vouchers and ESAs. And actually, just let me pause for a second to explain what ESAs are. So I think we all know what a voucher is. An ESA is the exact same thing. It's just a question of, does the money follow the child directly as a voucher, as it does with a voucher? Indirectly as it does with a voucher? Or does it, I think I'm mixing it up. Yeah, everyone knows what a voucher is. What an ESA does, an education savings account, the public money goes to the parent, and then the parent decides how to spend it on education. They're effectively the same thing, so vouchers and ESAs. So the Republican message has been very clear, private school choice. And as I mentioned, there just simply hasn't been an alternative. Now, our party, it seems we're still fighting the choice versus no choice debate, which means we're still fighting the charter versus no charter debate. But on the question of choice broadly, that debate's been had, that debate's been settled. All the public opinion polling that we do show that voters overwhelmingly support choice. Of course, everyone wants high quality options available, you know, particularly when they're free, their civil rights protections, et cetera. So choice resonates, and as a party, we need to embrace that and or acknowledge that. And what we're advocating for is that we define, that we create a form of choice that aligns with our values. And I think public school choice does that. You know, for many folks, you know, investing in the neighborhood schools is exactly what they want and what we need to do. There are a lot of folks, particularly at the elementary level, that it makes sense for your child to go to school right around the block and to be that supportive community. For other folks, it might be that it's much more convenient for you to send your child to the school right around from where you work. Or there might be a magnet school or vocational training that just makes more sense for you as a family. And so the message that that we're carrying to party leaders is, let's not reject choice. Rather, let's embrace choice, but define it in a way that aligns with our values. And you know, there's some really interesting work happening right now around what's called open enrollment. There's a campaign, there's a movement across the country to eliminate school district borders. Interestingly enough, it's led by mostly center-right organizations. The idea is that, look, throughout the country we have school districts whose boundary lines have effectively been, or were effectively drawn by discriminatory housing policies of the past. And we're locking in those discriminatory effects by locking families into what schools they can go to. And so that's a coalition that we're a part of as well, trying to break down these lines and allow kids to go to any public school within the state, and providing transportation and accessibility and making sure it's free to everyone. So there's a lot there to mine, but I think that it's just really important for us to reframe and reset our relationship around choice.
And if I could just add on to that, and this is why it's just so important to go out into the community, your community, other people's communities, wherever you can go to talk to people who are having all sorts of different experiences. When you talk about choice and you say you're against choice, for the people who live in a district where the only school their kids can go to is a D or less school, what choice have you given them? And how are they supposed to feel about you feeling their child doesn't deserve any more than that? As a mom, and my kids are older now, but there is nothing I would not have done to give my kids the best opportunity. And I wouldn't expect any other parent, any other mother or father to think their child deserves any less than any other child deserves.
Thank you on that. What I'll say is I think that there are different solutions depending on where you're from. So I can't speak to any other state. I know that in my area, I'm actually not a supporter of vouchers. But around this time, I get a lot of families, because this is a time when families are applying to put their kids in private school, high school, middle or elementary. So this is like usually when the conversation starts, and there are individuals that are asking about this. And what I point at is to sort of what you just mentioned, the different choices that they have available. In our city, we have multiple charter schools. We have about 4 charter schools that do an excellent job. We actually took a page from your alma mater, Boston Latin, and we created our own exam school within the high school. And I also talked to parents on the growth that has happened, that these schools are not the same schools that you went to school into, right? And show them what whether the high school, the middle school, the things that they are doing to shift and change and improve the education within that area. And I'm not going to say that it works all the time, but for most of the times, they're like, oh, I did not know that. They didn't know that there was a vocational school available for them if the kids wanted to get into trades, and how we're expanding all sorts of opportunities like that. So I think the more resources and educations we're able to give the parents so they can make the right decisions for the youth, the better. But if we are doing the work of providing all these choices and providing and creating policies to make sure that we are reforming our public school system, then the parent is probably not going to want to take their kids out of public education if public education is working for them. And that point that you mentioned at the end, that's a conversation that I have a lot with my colleagues that don't understand, why can't, why would somebody want to go to a different school? And it's like, until you lived it and you've seen what it's like. Now, I had great teachers, but I also was in a school district that was not just underperforming, but was deeply, deeply underfunded. So how can I could have had the best teachers in the country if we were spending, I think it was something like $15,000 less per kid than Cambridge. How can you expect that our education system is going to be the same?
And if I could just add on, our traditional public schools have amazing magnet programs. So choice doesn't mean you go private. I mean, we ended up having these vouchers for all in Florida, not this past session, the one before, where we found it was being taken advantage of or being used by a lot of people who were already sending their kids to private school, and now they were just getting a discount on the private school, and some homeschoolers who were going to Disney with the. So, I mean, that's not fiscally responsible, nor is that heading toward the goal of better education. But we have a bunch of magnet schools in Broward County, and they have that open enrollment period where you can choose to go to these schools that are specializing in STEM, are specializing in arts, or specializing in music or business or whatever. And I love that our county school district has really said, you know, we're listening to the parents. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And we are going to work on giving our families choices that are still within the traditional public school system. So I think we just need to talk about it in a way that we're hearing from the people we serve.
Yes. We've got one final question.
I'll try to be brief, and hopefully I don't like open up a can of worms around debates, but.
Too late.
Sorry, okay. So like the macro theories of school choice make sense, but I think in practice is a bit nuanced because you kind of talked about school choice within the public school system, and then you sort of talked about school choice outside of the public system, and I think that's fine, and I think families should have choice to send their children wherever they want to send them. But then, like, what happens to that D school that you're talking about? Because what happens is parents that are knowing of choices, whatever those choices may be, their students, their children typically go to other schools, but then there's like that cadre of students that still end up going to that D school. And so like school choice is great, but I think there's still a conversation to be had about like, what do you do with these failing schools, or what do you do with failing school systems or failing school districts? In the case of New York City, it's very large, the largest public school system. And so just wondering your thoughts on that, because yeah, school choice, great. The theory sounds wonderful and I agree with it, but the practice of it is quite nuanced and complicated, and it isn't as easy to just say like, we're just offering school choice and not really being intentional about where resources are being put into the education system.
So 1,000%, and you're not opening a can of worms. This is like, I agree with you. I mean, how do some of the schools end up being D schools? Often it is a lack of investment, and I'll be very clear, our traditional public schools in many ways are the lifeline of our communities. It's where a lot of kids get the resources they need, the extra help they need, the services they need that aren't provided in every type of school. And I think we do have to be careful to make sure choice is available to everybody, including the people who might not have an opportunity to choose another school, whether it's a transportation issue, whether they can't get there, it's just not viable for them to be going further away from home. And so you are 100% correct. Choice doesn't mean we should be giving up on our community schools. If anything, part of the choice is also to have quality community schools that are also a choice in this whole framework.
So what I would say, so I think
30
it's
30 seconds, because we're supposed to be
30 seconds. Great question. I think that there's a role to be played. You have to fund your schools correctly. You have to put policies in place that allows you to look into what our school districts are doing and allow, whether it's the community or the state or whoever, to basically help transform and reform. And if you do, like in Mass, we don't do like vouchers for private schools. But we talk a lot about traditional public schools and public charter schools, and our public charter schools are actually public. If you're doing it right, and the public schools are learning from some of the innovation happening in the charter schools, I think that you create a system where they're both pushing each other to excel and succeed. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure that your traditional public schools are being funded the way they should be. And in most of the places that are urban schools, they're not.
I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our audience members for your questions. And I just want to close with a couple of thoughts. I don't want us to lose some of the great ideas that we heard around pathways. We talked about dual enrollment. We talked about free community college. paid internships. One of the things that you mentioned, it's so important for kids to see, right, in order for them to really be. And so as I close, I'm grateful for this conversation that really shifted a lot towards public school choice. And given my experience, and Jorge mentioned this, I'm a former state legislator from Georgia, spent a lot of time working on education reform in general, but as soon as you are a Democrat and you support charter schools, like, you deal with the thing. And so I just want to encourage both of our organizations to continue this conversation about public school choice. I believe that when you support public school choice, you are espousing the values of a Democrat. It's about leveling the playing field. It's about making sure that you are not stuck with a system that does not work for you because of the zip code that you're from. It does not have to mean that we are abandoning the public school system, because none of these schools work unless all of the schools work, right? And if I want to have choice as a parent, I want to actually choose between high quality public schools. And at the end of the day, parents don't really care what the school is called. They just want a great school to send their kids to. And so if we are going to take back the ownership of education in this country as Democrats, these are the kinds of conversations we have to have so that we understand how to message about choice, that we understand very clearly that we are not abandoning public schools or kids that may be, quote unquote, stuck in a D school, but that our job is to make sure that all kids have access to a high quality education. And so I want to leave you with my favorite quote. It's by Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. It says that every person is born into this world to do something distinctive and something unique. And if he or she doesn't do it, it will never be done. We have a responsibility, whether you are elected, appointed, you work with elected officials, to shape public policy that works for all kids, all families. And as Dr. Mays reminds us, if we don't do it, it will never be done. Amen. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Is this yours? Wow, thank you so much. What a discussion and great engagement from the audience. The good news is that if you feel like your questions were not answered, you'll have an opportunity to ask them